Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Glad to be here with you tonight. It is the 20th of July, and I am going to have a great conversation with you all just a little bit after 10 o'clock. Here, I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. It is pitch black outside, and we are going to have a great evening together. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and away we go.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We're going to have a great conversation tonight. It's going to be great. Got a lot of things to chat with you all about. But before we get to that, I just do want to remind everybody that yet again, we continue to do our morning messages from the Center for Political Innovation. We're having different members of the organization record a message so that we can wake up with revolutionary optimism. Killian did one today. It was awesome. And there's another message planned from somebody else for tomorrow morning. So if you haven't caught Killian's message, maybe go watch it. If you want to catch the next one's already all set. So here's the link for the next one. Start your day with revolutionary optimism. The Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead, and we are empowering our membership. People are recording messages. We are holding this community together. It is really, really beautiful what we're doing. It really is really spectacular. Somebody just joined the Center for Political Innovation today. Are we up to 106 members now? I mean, we are becoming a more and more serious organization every day. Hey, didn't I talk about that for an hour last night? Anyway, all right. Alrighty. I'm writing it down. You sent the super chat. I'll give you an answer. That's okay. That's all right. And that's for those of you who who are new here, don't really know how we do things. The way we do this is I give my opening remarks, and my opening remarks are kind of what I'm doing right now, except, I get off to my good start. I do my opening remarks. And then after I do my opening remarks, we do the roll call where we find out who it is on the other side of the camera, who's watching. That's really great. We empower people, and that's really awesome. And then from there, I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something that you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, send me a super chat, and I will type it down, and it'll be in the docket, and I can answer it in the second half of our show. That's the way this works. So we've already got the first one about Henry Kissinger and China, and so I'll be starting my opening remarks now, but I'll be writing, or rather typing down, the super chats as they come in. So make sure to send the super chats my way, and we'll just get started here. Before we do so, I want to remind everyone to make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the notifications bell. Make sure you hit the like button. Weird things are happening in the subscription area. I'll just tell you, it's very bizarre. People get unsubscribed and they didn't mean to. And then yesterday, 16 people subscribed, and I thought that was weird. What are the chances? It's very odd. They're messing with the subscriber count. So make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the notifications bell. Make sure you come back and check that you're subscribed, because they're messing with people. They're doing some weird stuff to this account. I'll tell you that much. Right? There you go. There you go. And thank you for that super chat, Jane. That's a good question, and I'll be happy to answer that. And yeah, now I do want to mention I will be talking about RFK and his testimony later in the show. I'll be talking about RFK, but I wanted to start my opening remarks tonight by reminding everyone that loving America is our job. Let me say that once more. Loving America is our job because we aspire to someday lead America. If you aspire to someday own a Kleenex company that makes tissue paper, tissues for people to blow their noses, you can't hate tissues. If you aspire to own a hot dog company, you can't hate hot dogs. But communists, unfortunately, are the only people in the world that have it in their head, someday we're going to run the United States. We are going to be the political leaders of the country, and we are going to hate the country. Doesn't work that way. If you are actually politically serious, now, if you just want to be alienated and express your alienation, you just want to study the enemy ideology, communism, what Americans hate, I'm going to study that. If you do that, well, good for you. That's great. Feel good about yourself, pat yourself on the back, feel good about it. But that is not serious politics. It is our job to love America, to love the American working class and the American people, and to tap into the sentiments that are already widespread among the American people that can lay the basis for anti-imperialism. And you can't just love them in a vague sense. You can't just be like, yeah, I love them. They're all brainwashed sheep. They're all assholes, but I love them. No. You have to really know the American people and love the American people. Because, as I was told so many times by elderly communists, it's the only working class we've got. It's the only working class we've got. And one way or another, we have to find a way to love the American people, to relate to the American people, to connect with the American people, and to nudge them in the right direction. Because the explosion is coming, the crisis is coming every day, and we have the privilege of being alive in this time and nudging them in the right direction. But that means we have to take our historic privilege, our historic duty, we have to take it seriously. The fact that we have been presented with the challenge of history, that we're being alive at the time when capitalism is facing the ultimate meltdown of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profits, that we're facing the biggest technological leap that is causing the capitalist system to spin out of control into a downward spiral of degrowth and Bonapartism and divisions in the ruling class. We have to take the fact that we are alive in this time seriously. And that means no fooling around. I think, was it in All Along the Watchtowers, the Bob Dylan song, he says, "Let us not speak falsely now. The hour is getting late." There's other quotes that express similar sentiments, right? Time is running out. We must take our job seriously, and we must learn to love the American people. And as much as people don't want to do that, and as much as people who are attracted to communism or whatever don't want to do that, if you go to Brazil, the communists of Brazil love Brazil. You go to Mexico, the communists of Mexico love Mexico. And we must love the American people. And the socialism that we develop for America must be as American as apple pie. It must have red, white, and blue written all over it. It must be something that every American can relate to, and it must be something intended to address the struggles and contradictions of American society. And if you can't wrap your mind around that, if your socialism is just an expression of alienation, then it's not ever going to really count for anything. If anything, it's just going to be a vehicle for the richest people to beat back the lower levels of capital. It's just going to be a mechanism for helping the capitalists and the ultra rich impose their degrowth. Genuine socialism is optimistic. Genuine socialism is constructive. Genuine socialism wants to build. You got to love the American people. And one thing about America is that America, I have been very clear on these streams that America is not a nation. A nation has a common language, a common culture, common history. We don't have that in the United States. We have different nationalities here, different cultures, different waves of migration, different regions. The United States is not a nation in the classic sense. The United States is a country. It's a country kind of synthetically created by capitalism, colonialism, slavery, imperialism. And we all got here in pretty awful ways, some more awful than others. But we all got here, and we're all here. And we're all smudged together from all different corners of the world, smudged together here in this synthetically created country created by capitalism. We're all smudged together. And we got to figure out how we get from here to socialism. So we got to think about what it means to be an American. There's parts of this country that I had not ventured to. Shout out to everyone in Oregon and Washington State CPI. I went out there last year, and it was really a meaningful experience for me to go out there to see Elizabeth Young, who's now our president, to see, different people in the organization, Richard and Alex and all kinds of different people, right? Marissa. It was really meaningful for me to get to that part of the country because I'd never been there before. I went there once when I was a child. I remember I was in Seattle with my parents. I went to a museum with them or something. Really long time ago. But I never really learned to embrace the Pacific Northwest. It has its own unique culture, right? Mormonism is a big aspect of the culture out there, right? Many people out there don't practice the Mormon faith, but Mormonism, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, places like that, Mormonism is a really big impact on the culture, right? And just even though people may not practice that faith, it has a really big impact on them. Board games are really big in the Pacific Northwest because it rains all the time and they're indoors. And it's also, the Mormons really emphasize the family getting together and playing board games. It's a big part of Mormonism. So, it's interesting to go to different parts of the country. I haven't spent too much time in California. But every time I've been out to LA or out to the Bay Area, it has a special vibe to it. There's something about the Bay Area that has a special vibe to it. I'm here on the East Coast. I've spent a long time in New York City. I grew up in Ohio. I can tell you all about the Midwest, but even the Midwest is rather diverse. If you go up to Minnesota and Wisconsin, it's very different, right? Minnesota and Wisconsin, you have a lot of people from Scandinavia. You got a lot of Norwegians. You got a lot of Finns. You got a lot of Danes. You got a lot of big, strong people, and you got a lot of Roman Catholics up there, right? The rural areas tend to be very Roman Catholic, whereas you go to the South, the rural areas tend to be evangelical and Protestant. But you have rural Roman Catholics up there in the what do you call that? Wisconsin, Minnesota. What is that region called? I don't even know what it's called, but that area, right? Michigan has its own vibe. Michigan certainly has its own vibe to it. And the South, who can forget the South, right? My father's from the South, and I spent a lot of time in Missouri as a kid, and Missouri and Texas. I've been out to Texas many times, and you get to the deep South, you talk about Alabama, you talk about Mississippi, you talk about Georgia, you talk about the Florida Panhandle. These are areas that have a specific vibe to them. The military is a really big part of the culture in the South, right? The military is a really big part of the culture. You also have rural African American folks, in the northern areas of the country. African Americans tend to be, we associated them with urban areas, but you go to Georgia, you go to Alabama, you go to Mississippi, you go to Louisiana, you have rural African Americans, right? A lot of African American folks who live in the countryside, rural areas, right? You don't see that. America is so diverse, and there's so many aspects of it. I mean, my understanding is that now in like the Chicago area, a lot of Muslims there, a lot of Muslims in the Chicago area. In Chicagoland, they talk about Chicagoland, the parts of Michigan that are near Chicago, the parts of Indiana, Gary, Indiana, a lot of Muslims out there. Wasn't that way when I was a kid. That's an interesting change in demographics. I mean, there's a lot of things about the United States that we all need to know. We all need to know the country. We all need to know the country. We need to know our own country. We need to know it like the back of our hand. One of the best words of advice I got is that when you meet somebody, ask them about their job. But don't just ask them about their job, because you're trying to get them talking, or ask them about their job because it's important to know what people's jobs are like. That was a word of advice I was given by some older communists I once knew. They said, if you meet a working person, ask them about their job and get the details. Find out what a day at their job is like. Find out what it is like at their job. Ask them questions. Pick their brain about their job. And you're not just doing that to show that you're interested in them. You're doing that because it is your job as a communist to know what kind of things go on and what kind of jobs people have. Right? You should be, as a communist, you should be an expert on what people's jobs are like, what their day is like, what a typical day at their job is like. That should be something you're very interested in, and you should know what a variety of different working people people's lives are like. Look, the United States, there's a special feel to America, right? When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I got interested in communism, and I started to develop, I learned the truth. I've told the story many times, but I guess it bears repeating, is that I had always been told that communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Never had any communist government been successful at anything. Communism failed. The Soviet Union had fallen like 5 years ago or whatever, back when I was a kid, and communism failed. Communism doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Every time everyone's ever tried it, it just doesn't work. So I started getting vaguely interested in communism when I was a teenager. Younger than a teenager, a preteen, I guess. And I remember one way or another, I got a copy of Leon Trotsky's book, The Revolution Betrayed. Leon Trotsky's book, The Revolution Betrayed, it has this title, The Revolution Betrayed. And I thought, well, this book will explain why the Soviet Union wasn't like genuine communism, and how there could be a good kind of communism, not like the Soviet Union. That's what I thought. The Revolution Betrayed. What is the Soviet Union and where is it going? That's the name of the book. So I opened it up, and I thought, this Trotsky guy, he was killed by Stalin. He was killed by Stalin, so he must have something that I can read. So I opened it up. And chapter 1 of Leon Trotsky's book, Revolution Betrayed, is called What Has Been Achieved. And it is full of statistics, data about the Soviet Union's economic achievements. And I just read page after page about all the electrification that was going on, and all the steel that's been produced, and all that. And I was like, this can't be true, because everybody knows communism's never had any success anywhere. So I went back to the library, and I got out the encyclopedia, and I read about the Soviet Union's economy. And it was indeed true that the Soviet Union had astounding economic successes, had built the world's biggest power plants, had expanded the life expectancy, had raised all kinds of people out of poverty. And I thought, this can't be true, because everybody knows that communism never had any successes. Communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Well, what I was told was a pack of lies, that the Soviet Union had astounding economic successes. And that was just a huge, alarm bells went off in my head. Like, what in the world? That was the sign that I had been lied to about communism, because the Soviet Union had amazing achievements in terms of industrialization, in terms of inventing space travel, defeating the Nazis. I mean, the Soviet Union economically, in terms of industrialization, electrification, building a modern educational system, wiping out illiteracy. I mean, I had just been lied to. They said communism never worked anywhere. Never had it ever had any successes. And it clearly had great successes in building Russia and the surrounding countries up from nothing. So I'd been lied to. So as a teenager, I started, at that point, I wasn't interested in Trotsky anymore. Now that I knew the truth, now that I knew that I'd been lied to about all the socialist countries, and that what they had sold me a big bill of goods, I was going to be a Stalinist, right? I was going to be a tanky, because the basis of American anti-communism was a big fat lie. And this big fat lie came up in every conversation. If you said we ought to have free healthcare, they'd say, oh, well, they tried that in the Soviet Union, and look what happened. Now, if you said we ought to have a higher minimum wage, well, they tried to give everyone a decent pay in the Soviet Union, look what happened. American politics is predicated on the lie of the 20th century, the myth of the 20th century, that socialism never had any achievements. And that's a big, fat, ugly lie. And I realized that. And so then I had to be a tanky, right? I had to be a Stalinist. I wasn't going to be a Trotskyite. I wasn't going to be an anarchist. Oh, no, I was going to be a tanky, because I'd been lied to over and over and over again about everything I knew about communism had been a big fat lie. And so I wasn't interested in being a trot. I wasn't interested in being a social democrat, democratic socialist. Screw that. I was interested in defending the realities of a system that had obliterated poverty, that had provided millions of people with running water and electricity and education, and had defeated the Nazis in World War II and invented space travel. I was interested in that, and I was furious that I'd been lied to, and that all the evidence in the world was right there. It was right there. You can't deny that the Soviet Union rapidly industrialized. You can't deny, and that everyone's scared to admit it. And I would talk to college professors, and they would say, yes, you're right, but, they killed millions of people, and that's not... Everyone, it was like a lie through omission that everyone was required to tell in America. We go around pretending that communism's never had any successes anywhere, and everyone knows that basic economic data contradicts that, but everyone just has to pretend otherwise, because U.S. society is predicated on this myth. And even the socialist movement, Trotskyites, democratic socialists, anarchists, they all say, oh yeah, they say communism never worked anywhere. All it's ever led to is killing millions of people. And they go, well, that's true, but we're going to do it differently. Such a convincing argument. But anyhow, so I was interested in being a Stalinist. I was interested in being a hardline Marxist-Leninist, because I'd been lied to, and because I wanted to take that anti-communist poison I'd been fed head on. right? And I knew that every argument about socialism inevitably gets back to, well, communism just doesn't work. I mean, it just never achieved anything anywhere. And that's such a lie. So I started getting interested in writers who defended the Soviet Union. And that is how I found this lovely lady. This lovely lady, the great Anna Louise Strong. Is there a picture of her in this book? No, no picture of her, but Anna Louise Strong. All right. I Change Worlds. Anna Louise Strong is just an amazing, amazing American writer, journalist. She's utterly amazing. And she was from, I believe she's from Ohio, like I am. Maybe she was born in Nebraska, but she's from the Midwest. She lived in Ohio at one point. She went to Oberlin College. Just an amazing writer. And I read her book, The Stalin Era, which is very good. I read her book, and this is her autobiography, I Change Worlds, which I absolutely love. All right, I've got another book by her called My Native Land, which is kind of a portrait of the United States during the Great Depression. It's a beautiful book. But I wanted to just read to you because Anna Louise Strong, she loved the American people. She absolutely loved the American people. And so I'm just going to read to you some from the introduction of her book. All right. This is, the older Americans ask me, whatever made you go to Moscow? The younger Americans say, can you get me a job if I ever come over? I want to pioneer in the new world. All of them want to ask, but hardly dare to phrase it. What is it really like in that strange world beyond the border? You must know. You've lived there more than 13 years. Is it really something new for which the world is waiting, or is it just one more of life's old delusions? What have you found there, and what has it made of you? You were just like us some 15 years ago. This is my attempt to answer their deeper question, to analyze for them and for myself the best I have learned from my life. I must begin not with the autumn of 1921 when I crossed the Russian border. I must begin far back, before the Bolshevik Revolution, before the war even. I cannot remember how far back this journey, which millions have been making with me, which I think all the world is making, toward Moscow and beyond Moscow. For Moscow is not the end, if indeed there is to be a final end to our journey. But I, like a million others, did not know where I was going in Seattle some 15 years ago. I am one of those who never knows the direction of my journey until I have almost arrived. There are others like me. I think most Americans are like me. Psychologists call us motor-minded, which means that we think not in terms of visual or auditory images, nor in terms of graphs and planes, but in terms of action. Perhaps it is our pioneer life that has made us so. It's journeying into a West which we could neither visualize nor plan, but only march to. Perhaps it is the effect upon our nervous system of the machines which we, unlike the rest of the world, are born knowing. Or perhaps it is not American at all, but primitively human, since consciousness always arises in individuals as in history, out of the clash of actions which always precede thought. In any case, we act, and afterwards, if we survive and still have time to reason, we know why we have acted. I remember years ago in a different world, my college, an estimable dean of women reproved me for some thoughtless act in these words. For what is our reason given us, if not to govern our actions? I told her it gave my reason a full-time job to explain my acts after I had done them, and I hadn't any reason left for other work. That wasn't quite as flippant as she thought it. How I have sometimes envied these people who plan out their lives beforehand, who know who they are when they are young, just what they intend to be. Yet when I look back, it seems that my life also has followed, if not a plan, at least a consistent direction. It was never one of which I was clearly conscious. I never laid it down in advance to follow. I grew from day to day by unplanned interaction of what, for want of a name, we call myself, which my parents and the far backed, unremembered past had made me, the impact of new forces out of which I picked what suited me. It seems we motor-minded folks also arrive. In the words of our national proverb, we don't know where we are going, but we are, like the rest of us, like the rest of the world, on our way. It saves much toil and pain to know where one is going. For though I feel quite sure that the goal which I am approaching is the goal I should have chosen, if I could have clearly planned it years ago, I cannot forget how many started as blithely as I did and wandered off to delusion and despair. Nor can I forget the wasted strength of my own years of bewildered, conflicting emotions, due to the fact that I never clearly understood my way. Others perhaps may learn from the chart of the road to avoid its detours, for I think my road is the road of millions. This is powerful stuff. This is Anna Louise Strong, the American revolutionary socialist, who struggles. And in this text, she talks about the struggling to be right in her soul. Right in her soul. It's very powerful stuff. This is a socialist. This is a revolutionary, Anna Louise Strong. We've got to learn to know the American people, to know and to embrace that motor-mindedness, that action orientation that defines the American people. We've got to hijack that American energy, that American innovation as a motor with which to build socialism. We've got to find a socialism that connects with the American spirit in order to get us out of the crisis. That's what we need to do. But I am going to show the RFK clip. We'll talk about that later. But before we do that, I'm actually going to tell an American folk tale. Could have actually happened. Nothing too fantastical about this folk tale. But it's very American. When you listen to this, this is just so American. It comes from New England. The story goes like this. It's a legend. Don't know if it actually happened. It may have happened differently than this, but the story gets passed on. This is just an American folk tale I heard. Found it to be amusing. This was back at the time that the country was being settled. There were a lot of people going out west and, setting up homesteads, setting up their own farms. There was a minister, traveling preacher, who was traveling around. He would go out to areas where there weren't many people, there weren't many churches, and he would preach a sermon. And he would preach very long sermons that went on for 3-4 hours. But people from the whole county would gather around. There'd be sometimes hundreds of people who would come to see him because there wasn't much to do, right? There was no movie theaters back then. There's no radios, no TVs. And so if there's a traveling preacher who's in the area, people would pile in to see the traveling preacher. So the story goes that the traveling preacher came to an area and he found a man on the side of the road who was just distraught. He was very, very upset. The man was just devastated. He said to the man, what's the problem? He said, I'm a lumberjack. I live in a tent and I'm a lumberjack. And while I was sleeping, someone came into my tent and stole my axe. And so now I can't do my job as a lumberjack. I can't cut down any trees because someone stole my axe. What can you do? Preacher, can you help me? Is there a way we can get my axe back? And the preacher thought for a moment, and he said, I will pray on this, and why don't you come when I'm going to preach next Sunday to the gathering of all the people in the area, and I will see if at that prayer service I can find a way to get your axe back. The man said, okay. So Sunday came around. They gathered, outdoor prayer service. Hundreds of people gathered in this valley. And this preacher was there. And again, there was no TV back then. There was no radio. It was really the only thing around, It's the middle of the barren wasteland, the pioneers out in the West. So the pastor, the minister is up there, and he starts preaching to this crowd of people. And he begins his sermon by saying, brothers, sisters, among us, there's a man who is a lumberjack, and someone has stolen his axe. Someone has stolen his axe, and so we will hold him in our hearts as we have our prayer service today. So he begins preaching. He starts preaching for about an hour. Starts out preaching very quietly, but he's building up to making points. After about an hour, he gets into it, and he said, I want to let everyone know that after I met that man, that lumberjack who'd lost his axe, I went and prayed to the Lord that he would find his axe. And God revealed to me that the man who stole his axe will be in the crowd today. He will be among us today, here in this very valley. So let's keep that in mind as I continue my sermon. So he started preaching again, and he preached for another hour, and he's reading different sections of the Bible, and he's yelling, and he's getting very fired up. People are very impressed. And then he stops the sermon, and he says, and not only did God reveal to me that the man who stole his axe would be here in the prayer service with us today, but God actually revealed unto me the face of the man who stole his axe. I know his face, and I can see him here in the crowd. I know who he is. I won't point him out, but I know who he is. Everyone gasped. Oh, wow, the guy who stole the axe is among us. So he continues preaching and waving his arms and holding up the Bible and telling different stories and anecdotes until finally he gets towards the end of the sermon, and he walks away from the pulpit, and he picks up a giant rock. And he says, brothers and sisters, I told you that God revealed to me that the man who stole the axe of our fair lumberjack brother, that he is in the audience today. And I told you that God revealed to me the face of the man who stole his axe. And I know his face, and I can see him here in the crowd. And now I must tell you the final command that God gave me. God told me to take this giant rock that I'm holding here in my hand and throw it at the face of the man who stole his axe. So now I shall throw this rock. And he holds up the rock, and a guy in the front row ducked. And then he said, now give him his axe back. And that's how he ended his sermon. I think that's beautiful. I think that's hilarious. It could be true, it could be true, right? I mean, he was bluffing, obviously. I think it's a very funny story. I enjoy little folksy American anecdotes like that, because the guilty party, revealed himself, ducked. Everyone knew he must be the guy who stole the axe. He said, give him his axe back. And then he walked away, and that was the end of his sermon. I think that's a great, very American anecdote. I don't know if it ever really happened. It's kind of a tall tale. It's kind of a legend. Something like that could have happened, but it probably got exaggerated and bragged about. I love stories like that. So on that note, let's listen to RFK, Robert Kennedy Jr., Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., the son of Bobby Kennedy, RFK Sr., the nephew of John F. Kennedy, President of the United States, who was assassinated. He testified before Congress this morning about how the government is improperly suppressing messages on social media and elsewhere. I watched the testimony. There was also a woman from Breitbart who testified along with him about the Hunter Biden laptop story and how it was suppressed. And before RFK testified, they published a horrendous letter denouncing him as anti-Semitic. So let's just listen to RFK. I'll stop it. I'll try to, one of the things is when I show this, you all could just watch this by yourself if you wanted to. So I'm going to try to stop this and comment as much as I can, because if I just show things, that doesn't help you all. So let's watch RFK's kind of opening spiel defending himself from the smears. Take it away, RFK.
Vaccines in that speech. I didn't talk about anything that was a verboten subject. I just was talking about my campaign and the conversation that we ought to be having with each other as Americans. But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy.
Notice Dennis Kucinich sitting behind him and Elizabeth Kucinich sitting behind Dennis. I think that's amusing. Dennis Kucinich was my congressman, by the way, in Ohio. I could tell you a lot of stories about Dennis Kucinich.
We need to be talking to each other. Now, this is a letter that many of you signed. Many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. This 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. The charges in this, and by the way, censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, to Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for. And I was censored not just by the Democratic administration, I was censored by the Trump administration. I was the first person censored as the chairman pointed out, by the Biden administration 2 days after it came into office. It ordered a truthful, and by the way, they had to invent a new word called malinformation to censor people like me. There was no misinformation on my Instagram account. Everything I put on that account was cited and sourced to peer-reviewed publications or government databases. Nobody has ever pointed to a single piece of misinformation that I publish. I was removed for something they called malinformation. Malinformation is information that is true, but is inconvenient to the government.
That's absolutely ridiculous. And I've seen that's every time they go after RT, that's what they say. They don't ever point to anything we say that's false on RT. They just say, well, we don't like the way you presented it. It's you're saying true things, but they're inconvenient for what we want. That is the language of the censors now, right? You can say everything you say can be true, but you say it in a way that they don't like. So therefore, it's malinformation. That is the language of the censors nowadays, and it is unbelievable. And we get that all the time, right? It's disinformation, Russian propaganda. It's like, is it true or not? Is it true or not?
They don't want people to hear, and that's antithetical to the values of our country. After I announced my presidency, it became more difficult for people to censor me outright. So now I'm subject to this new form of censorship, which is called targeted propaganda, where people apply pejoratives like anti-vax. I've never been anti-vaccine, but everybody in this room probably believes that I have been, because that's the prevailing narrative. Anti-Semitism, racism, these are the most appalling, disgusting pejoratives, and they're applied to me to silence me.
But everyone who disagrees with the woke left is an anti-Semite, is a racist, is a white supremacist, is a fascist, is a pedophile rapist. Every single person, right? And that's it's all getting so stupid at this point, right? I mean, if everybody who disagrees with the woke left, doesn't matter if you're Robert Kennedy, doesn't matter if you're, I mean, no matter who you are, right? If you disagree with the woke left, Twitter sends out the memo that you're a white supremacist, neo-Nazi fascist who once shook hands with LaRouche, who once shook hands with a Nazi, who once shook hands with, I mean, it's getting stupid. It's getting stupid. It's getting stupider by the minute. And people who don't get wise to that, I mean, you're either with the woke left or against them. And if you're with them, they can look the other way. If you're Vosh, you can send pictures of your genitals to minors, and that's totally fine, right? If you're Vosh, you can advocate legalizing child porn and defend child porn, and have friends come forward and say that you look at child porn and all of that, and that's totally fine if you're Vosh. But if you're somebody who is actually critical of the mainstream, and if you're somebody who opposes their wars, if you challenge the status quo, big pharma, what is it? No matter what, you are an evil person, no matter what. And that's how they go. It is maniacal and evil.
People don't want me to have that conversation about the war, about groceries, about inflation, about the war on the middle class in this country that we need to be having. And by the way, I want to say this while I'm on the record, that in my entire life, and why I'm under oath, in my entire life, I have never uttered a phrase that was either racist or anti-Semitic.
Now, I have a hard time believing that. I'm sure that he must have slipped and said something one time, right? But whatever. I get the point he's making.
I have spent my life fighting my professional career, fighting for Israel.
Yeah, not a big fan of Israel.
The protection of Israel. I have a better record on Israel than anybody in this chamber today.
Not a big fan of Israel. And Dennis Kucinich is also not a big fan of Israel, so that's interesting.
I'm the only person who has publicly objected to the $2 billion payout that the Biden administration is now making to Iran, which is a
Yeah, what's going on with that? What is the $2 billion payout that Biden's given to Iran? What is that? Is that part of the Iran nuclear deal? Or, what is this? I'm going to look for that. I heard this morning, and I'm just like, what? Right? Biden payout to Iran. Like, what is that? Because, yeah, yeah, what is that? I don't know what that is, right? It's a sanctions waiver, right? It's a sanctions waiver that Biden has just made toward Iran. That's what that is. Well, that's good, right? The sanctions on Iran are bullshit. And so, yeah, not impressed with that part of RFK's speech.
A genocidal program. I'm the only one who's objected to that. I fought more ferociously for Israel than anybody. But I am being censored here.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's the point. You can be super Zionist, super pro-Israel, and it does not matter, right? They'll still call you an anti-Semite because you disagree with them, right? Doesn't matter. You can be Jewish yourself. You can have beaten up Nazis. You can, you can be, I believe, Norman Finkelstein has relatives who died in the Holocaust, but no, you're an anti-Semite. No, you said something that went against what we wanted, so we get to smear you, right? This guy is, RFK is a super Zionist, pro-Israel. Doesn't matter. He's still a neo-Nazi white supremacist. It just shows you how ridiculous it's getting. The wokes are evil, and no matter who you are, if you disagree with them, they destroy your reputation.
Through this target, through smears, through misinterpretations of what I've said, through lies, through association, which is a tactic that we all thought we had been discredited and dispensed with after the Army McCarthy hearings in the 1950s. But those same weapons are now being deployed against me to silence me. I know many of the people who wrote this letter. I don't believe there's a single person who signed this letter who believes I'm anti-Semitic. I do not believe that. There is no evidence of that. I want to say something I think that's more important, and it goes directly to what you talked about, ranking member, which is the need, this toxic polarization that is destroying our country today.
Yeah.
And how do we deal with
People are tired of it. People are tired of people getting labels thrown on them and not being able to debate politics.
that? This kind of division is more dangerous for our country than any time since the American Civil War. And how do we deal with that? How are we going to, every Democrat on this committee believes that we need to end that polarization. Do you think you can do that by censoring people? I'm telling you, you cannot. That only aggravates and amplifies the problem. We need to start being kind to each other. We need to start being respectful to each other. We need to start restoring the comedy to this chamber and to the rest of America, but it has to start here. My uncle, Edward Kennedy, has more legislation with his name on it than any senator in United States history. Why is that? Because he was able to reach across the aisle, because he didn't deal in insults, because he didn't try to censor people. He brought home people who were antithetical to what he believed in. He came home almost every weekend with people like Orrin Hatch to our house at the compound in Hyannisport. At that time, Orrin Hatch to me was like Darth Vader, because I was an environmentalist. And I was saying, why is Teddy bringing this guy home? But he knew that he was effective because he understood that comedy and respect and kindness and compassion and empathy for other people is the only way to restore the function in this chamber. But more importantly, today we need to give an example in the leadership of our country of being respectful to each other. If you think I said something that's anti-Semitic, let's talk about the details. I'm telling you all the things that I'm accused of right now by you. And in this letter are distortions, they're misrepresentations. I didn't say those things. There's fragments that I said, but I denounce anybody who uses the words that I have said to imply something that is negative about people who are Jewish. I never said those things. And I want to point out also that the chairman pointed to Dennis Kucinich, who's fighting behind me. There is no two people in the country who feel more differently about American politics than these two people. And yet they were friends. Dennis attended his children's basketball games, attended his daughter's wedding. This is what we need, how we need to start treating each other in this country. We have to stop trying to destroy each other, to marginalize, to vilify, to gaslight each other. We have to find that place inside of ourselves of light, of empathy, of compassion, and above all, we need to elevate the Constitution of the United States, which was written for hard times. And that has to be the premier compass for all of our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I mean, look, the polarization now in American politics is over bullshit, right? It's a way to prevent us from talking about the real issue in the country, which is the danger of a new world war, which is the economy falling apart, the lack of investment in our infrastructure, and the fact that our government is loyal to a group of big corporations and bankers and not to the people of the country. That is the issue. And both sides realize that. Both sides realize that our government is not loyal to us. It's loyal to a global financial system. Both sides realize that our civil liberties are being taken away and the country is turning into a police state. Both sides realize that life is getting harder for us. And, the libertarians, the right wing, they realize this. The far left, socialists, communists, they realize this. But the way that they've made sure that no one gets into power to address these things is by making us fight about the transgender thing and making us fight about abortion and making us fight about gay marriage and it's a big distraction, and it doesn't address the problem in any conceivable way. And the way that they make sure that all the people who are on the left who want to stop the wars, and all the people on the left who want health care for all, the way they make sure that they don't get it is they make sure that none of them can ever associate with anyone on the right who wants to stop the wars, anyone on the right who wants to rebuild the infrastructure of the country. The way they make sure people on the right, they never team up with anybody on the left who wants to stop the wars, who wants to rebuild the infrastructure, who wants to stop the police state. What do? Same kind of thing. Guilt by association. And that's why the Rage Against the War Machine protest that happened in Washington, D.C., I have never in my life seen a bigger cancel culture campaign against an anti-war protest. They called it, Jason and Ruhe called it a right-wing terrorist gathering. Right? You would have thought this was a Ku Klux Klan rally. It's been called a white supremacist demonstration. Well, Cynthia McKinney, Congresswoman, she spoke at it. She's not a white supremacist. Garland Nixon, he's certainly not a white supremacist. Dennis Kucinich, definitely not a white supremacist. Tulsi Gabbard, not a white supremacist. It was a great protest that happened. But in the lead up to it, they were terrified of it. They were utterly terrified of it. And there was just such a psychological warfare operation. Scott Ritter was forced to withdraw from the march. All these big name libertarians denounced the march. And I mean, it was just endless. Everybody was just demanded that you denounce the march. Well, CPI, not only did we not denounce the march, we attended it. We were official sponsors of the march. And to top it all off, we had our own reception afterwards. We had an after party. It was packed, over 200 people there to see Scott Ritter. It was a beautiful moment because we knew how important it is. And the next month, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, the Answer Coalition, had a leftists only rally. Had a rally that nobody who didn't agree with the trans thing was welcome at. Nobody who was a libertarian was welcome at. Nobody who, didn't cross the I's and dot the T's and do everything right. And they had their little, and it was a fraction of the size of the Rage Against the War Machine rally. But they felt good about themselves. They felt good about themselves, and they got to be the boss. They got to be the boss. Brian Becker got to be the boss. No one got on the stage unless they went through Brian, unless they went through big boss Brian Becker. He got to be the boss. He had the permit. He controlled the microphone. He got to feel so good about himself. And it was less than 1,000 people, and it was a bunch of little tiny communist groups that are growing smaller and smaller and smaller and more isolated from the population. And, Jenny Lind says half the speakers weren't even talking about the war, just woke nonsense. Absolutely. Glad they gave a platform to the Uhuru movement. They should have let the Uhuru movement speak at the Rage Against the War Machine. But we had the Uhuru movement at our reception after the Rage Against the War Machine rally. We had Scott Ritter there too. Yeah, I mean, this cancel culture stuff is a way to avoid the real issues. The issue is the war, the danger of a new world war, U.S. militarism around the world. The issue is the police state, the stripping away of our civil liberties. The issue is the economy and the living standards of the American people going down. That is the issue that must be discussed. And the woke stuff and the anti-woke stuff, the Ron DeSantis anti-woke stuff, all of that is a smokescreen. It's a smokescreen to prevent anyone from talking about the real issues. And the real issues are the crumbling infrastructure of the United States, the war, the low-wage police state. And we at the Center for Political Innovation are trying to actually get things done and get our country out of the nightmare that it's in. Look, folks, the message that we have here, our understanding, right? If you want, people have been talking the way we talk for a really long time. The Pledge of Allegiance, the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance, was written by Francis Bellamy, Francis Bellamy was a Baptist minister, and he was a socialist, and he owned a flag company. And Francis Bellamy, he was a socialist in Boston, and he gave socialist sermons, and they banned him from the pulpit in Boston because his sermons were giving, revolutionary messages. So he moved to Florida, and he preached in Florida. But then they wouldn't let him preach in Florida either because he refused to allow segregation in his church, right? He was in Florida. Florida was in the South, and he was not going to have segregation. He wasn't going to have the blacks on one side of the room and the whites on the other side of the room. So he couldn't preach down there either. But Francis Bellamy, he took the words of the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance from the oath that former Confederate soldiers had to take in order to get their voting rights back. And that's how, if you listen to the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance, it's kind of, it's a repudiation of the Confederacy. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, not two, one nation, indivisible, meaning you can't divide it, no secession, indivisible, with liberty, no slaves, and justice, no slaves, for all, i.e., everybody, no slaves. All right. Now, they didn't add the under God part to the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance until the 1950s, and it was because of the Knights of Columbus, a Roman Catholic organization, had a petition because they wanted to add a section to the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance that would make it against communism, and communism was associated with atheism, so they added under God, but under God was not originally in it. And what's interesting is the under God part is actually, they say it came from Abraham Lincoln, from the Gettysburg Address. But if you listen to the Gettysburg Address, it's actually, they're not understanding what it means, right? If you read the Gettysburg Address, what does the Gettysburg Address say? The line under one nation under God comes from the Gettysburg Address. Let's pull it up. Gettysburg Address. Right? It's a very short speech. They used to make kids memorize it in school. They don't do that anymore. But, I don't know. Was memorization a good thing? I don't know. Right? But, all right. And the Gettysburg Address says that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, that government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. And so that's where the phrase nation under God comes from. But what people don't understand is in the Gettysburg Address, what that does not mean God is above this nation or this nation is religious. He's saying inshallah. You know how Muslims say inshallah, like God wills it, right? He's saying the time the country is divided in a civil war, but he says, we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation under God, like with God's permission, if God wills it, inshallah, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. That is what he's saying there. The phrase under God at that time in standard American English meant if God wills it, right? It's, in the Quran, it says that if something's going to happen, but you don't know if it's going to happen, in the Islamic tradition, you say, so I am going to go to the store this afternoon, inshallah, like if God wills it, because you don't know. I mean, there could be an earthquake and you might not get to the store. Well, that's what Abraham Lincoln is saying. Abraham Lincoln is saying, they all not and died in vain, and inshallah, if God wills it, under God, we'll have a new birth of freedom. So it doesn't mean what they added to the Pledge of Allegiance. But anyway, the whole reason I'm bringing up the goddamn Pledge of Allegiance, I'm sorry, whole sidetrack here. The whole reason I'm bringing up the Pledge of Allegiance is because Francis Bellamy, who wrote it, his cousin was Edward Bellamy. And Edward Bellamy was a socialist. He was also a socialist. Francis Bellamy was a socialist and a Baptist minister. Edward Bellamy was a socialist science fiction writer. And Edward Bellamy wrote the novel Looking Backward, which is a science fiction novel that was a bestseller in the 1800s about a future socialist America. It's still a really good book. You can read it. It's called Looking Backward. And Edward Bellamy, he wrote this science fiction novel. It's about an American guy who, it's some typical American guy, and someone hypnotizes him to go to sleep because he's having trouble sleeping. And he goes to sleep, and then he wakes up in the year 2000. And the USA is a socialist utopia where everyone has enough and everyone shares everything, and there's no inequality or war or anything like that, right? It's a science fiction novel. And it was a bestseller. And that was there. Many people across the country, they formed Bellamy clubs, they were called. They formed nationalist clubs, they were called, to promote Edward Bellamy's vision of building socialism in the United States. It was one of the first socialist movements that had kind of come into existence. It was in the 1880s. But Edward Bellamy, he also wrote this beautiful short story called The Parable of the Water Tank. And I'm going to post the link here. It's in the public domain. We've republished it as CPI. It's in our CPI educational manual. But it's a story about the problem of overproduction. That's what it's about. The Parable of the Water Tank. And go and read The Parable of the Water Tank. It's about overproduction. Starvation because of abundance. That's the problem with capitalism. Go and read The Parable of the Water Tank. The Parable of the Water Tank. It explains the problem with capitalism is starvation because of abundance. Poverty amid plenty. That's the problem with capitalism, is that the more advanced technology becomes, the harder people work, the poorer everybody gets. It's not a rational system. And this beautiful, beautiful parable, the Parable of the Water Tank, is a beautiful, beautiful explanation of why the capitalist system needs to be replaced with a centrally planned socialist economy. And I don't think Edward Bellamy was a Marxist. I think he was some other kind of religious Christian socialist, whatever, but he understood the laws of capitalism. And go and read The Parable of the Water Tank, and you'll get it, right? Socialists always got this, that capitalism is an inefficient system. It's the only system in history where people are hungry because there is too much food, where people are homeless because there are too many houses, where abundance creates poverty, where technological advancement and the efficiency and the rising efficiency of living standards leads to everyone getting poorer. That's the problem with capitalism. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of the Parable of the Water Tank. I hope people enjoyed my opening remarks for tonight. So now I will do the roll call, names and locations, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Then after that, I'm going to answer super chats. So there you go. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Who is on the other side of the camera? Who's watching? Who's watching? We got Kendall in San Diego. Welcome, Kendall. We got the USA on steroids, Mitchell Sparks. We got Mark Utica in New York. We got Temple City, California. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. We got Rice from Adelaide, Australia. We got Graham Jones from Pennsylvania. Welcome, Graham. That's a new name. Lexington, Kentucky. Randall Wilson. Jonathan C. from Los Angeles. Nick in Tampa. Jamie in St. Paul. Steve in Boston. Molly McGuire in Orange County. Heidi in Edinburgh, Chris out in Salt Lake City, Chandler in Indiana, Patrick in Maine, Andre in Toronto, Colin in Greensboro, North Carolina, Alex from Brazil, Caleb from Ypsilanti, that's in Michigan, Kakalaki, Harold Dog Bottom, Funky Lollipop, Briggy in Pennsylvania, love to have you, Briggy, so glad you're here. We got Clinton Fraser in London. We got Joe in Jersey City, home of the revolution. Elliot in Austin. Gonzalo in Argentina. There we go. Ian Chester in England. Sherry Spector in Cape May, New Jersey. Seasoned Noob in China. Welcome. So glad you all are here watching. Did I miss anybody? We got Boise, Idaho. James Turner. Jamie in St. Paul, Minnesota. Steve in Boston. Welcome, Bob Troy in New York. Martin in Ireland. Welcome, Martin. Sam in Springfield. Welcome, welcome. Jonathan Mahari in Stockholm, Sweden. Bob Troy in New York. Harold Hedge in Illinois. Welcome, Harold Hedge. Harold Hedge, right? Upper Pennsylvania. Viking Dave. You're a UP. You're in the Upper Peninsula. UP. Welcome, welcome, Viking Dave. Welcome, welcome. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? AJ from New Jersey. St. David's, Bermuda. Welcome, 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 everybody. So glad to have you all here with us tonight. I really enjoy it. I want to remind everybody that we're doing a great thing with these morning messages. Every morning, another Center for Political Innovation member puts forward the morning message. It's really, really great. Oh, we got Emmett in Dallas. A lot of new people tonight. A lot of new people. That's really, really great. So yeah, go. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the notifications bell. They're messing with me on the subscriber count. It is very odd. It is extremely weird what's happening. Keith Preston in Richmond, Virginia. He runs Attack the System. He's a fan of our work. Welcome, Keith. So go make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure that you've notified that the subscription. It is very weird what is going on. Very, very, very weird. Very, very weird. So I'm getting towards the part of the show where I answer people's super chat questions. Last night we had a really long show because people just kept sending super chats. And so I just kept talking. And if you want that to be the case tonight, get me talking. That's what I ask you to do. Get me going. Wind me up and let me talk at you. Let me answer your questions, joke with me, get me going, right? That's what I'm here to do. I am here to hang out with all of you and entertain all of you and answer your questions. So shoot me a super chat. Like I said, afterwards, a lot of people watch these, but you have the privilege of being one of the people who watches this live. So you will know, you'll be able to impact the show. So send me a super chat about what it is you want me to talk about. And now I will start answering people's super chat questions. First super chat question. You asked me about something I talked about for about an hour last night. So Tahitian fire. If you want a really long, complicated explanation of that, go and watch last night because I talked about it at great length. Short answer is this. Henry Kissinger is responsible for the policy of the United States of teaming up with China against the Soviet Union, which culminated into the USA restoring diplomatic relations with China and the USA bringing foreign investment into China. That was Henry Kissinger's strategy in the Cold War. It was a result of the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers cultivated him to develop that policy, but it really benefited China. China has very much benefited from the fact that Nixon first went over there, and then under the Carter administration, diplomatic relations were established. And so because of that, Henry Kissinger is going to be a hero to the Chinese people because he arranged for them to get foreign investment. He arranged for the USA to withdraw recognition from the government on Taiwan and instead recognize the People's Republic on the mainland. So yes, sir. That Henry Kissinger is largely responsible for policies from the United States that have really benefited China. And that's why, and we see Henry Kissinger as the guy who did the coup in Chile, as the guy who oversaw the Vietnam War and killed lots of people, but that's not how they're going to see him in China. That is not how they're going to see him. So we got Carter in Duluth, Killian in Milwaukee, late for the roll call. That's okay. But yeah, that is why. To China, he is the man who arranged for them to get recognition from the United States, who arranged for them to get foreign investment. And I talked about that for like an hour last night. And I compared him to Oliver Cromwell, and I compared him to other, Alexander the Great and different figures from history who you can see from one angle or another angle. I did a whole long rant about that. So go listen to last night's show. It was pretty good. It was a long show last night. I went on for 3 hours last night, but it was great. You guys kept asking me questions. You wound me up and I kept going, and that's the way it works. So there you go. All right. So that question, that's our first super chat question. Keep the super chats rolling in, folks. Get me talking about stuff. Jane Frericks asks, if a Westerner wanted to experience life under an anti-imperialist government today, which country would you recommend spending time in? That's an interesting question. That's a very interesting question, Jane. Because let me just point this out. In the 1970s, the 1980s, North Korea and Cuba had almost exactly the same political and economic system. Did you know this? They were both Soviet-aligned Marxist governments. They were slightly more radical than the Soviet Union. They were aligned with third world liberation struggles. They were close to Libya and Gaddafi. They were, Guevarian, I guess you could say. They were to the left of the Brezhnev government in the Soviet Union. But Americans loved Cuba. Right? A lot of Trotskyites had it in their head that Cuba was great. Cuba is a genuine socialist country, but North Korea was always hated by Americans. Other than the Workers' World Party and the Communist Party USA, North Korea was completely shunned. And it's weird because they had the exact same political system. They had a cult of personality around their leader. They had a one-party Communist Party ruling. They were aligned by the Soviet Union. The apartment buildings even looked the same. The mass housing that they constructed with Soviet assistance, they had the apartment buildings looked the same. But American leftists, they loved Cuba, and they did not like North Korea. And Michael Parenti, who is a brilliant writer, pointed out that they basically had the same economic system. And so why does Cuba get a pass with American leftists and North Korea doesn't? Well, there's cultural differences. Cultural differences. Korean culture is much more foreign to Americans than Cuban culture is. We've got Latin folks here in America, right? We have Latinos here in America. We like to drink rum in America. We like salsa music. And a lot of American leftists can go to Cuba and they can drink the rum and they can listen to the salsa music and they can go, this isn't so bad. But a lot of Americans, they get to North Korea and they see the military parades and they see the big pictures of Kim Il-sung everywhere and the mountains and the cold, the snow in the mountains, and they get scared. It's the same political and economic system, but they perceive it differently. And in fact, both Cuba and North Korea, prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, had a kind of an ideological moment. In Cuba, they called it the rectification campaign. In North Korea, they called it the Cultural Revolution. But both of them, as the Soviet Union was falling, they had like an ideological rearmament. And they both suffered devastatingly after the fall of the Soviet Union. Cuba, they called it the special period. There were food shortages. They didn't have enough electricity. North Korea, they called it the arduous march. People started to starve to death. North Korea and Cuba, it's basically, now Cuba is much further along in terms of economic reforms because they have control of their whole country. The whole island is under the leadership of the Communist Party, and they're able to get more foreign investment. Whereas North Korea, half the country is occupied by the United States. The country is still divided, and so North Korea is still pretty isolated. North Korea has had to proliferate nuclear weapons. So North Korea hasn't been able to move ahead on the market reforms as much as North Korea has. But the reason I'm telling you this, Jane, is because it's weird. Americans go to Cuba and have continued to go to Cuba and think highly of Cuba. And Americans, North Korea always scared them. That points to how important kind of cultural differences is. Cuba is much more like America culturally than North Korea is. It has nothing to do with the economic and political system. It's pretty much the same economic and political model. That shows you that I always tell the story that when I went to the Global Communist Youth Festival in Ecuador, the North Koreans, right, they hugged us, Americans. Like as soon as they saw us, they just like threw their arms around us. And the reason that they did that is because in Korean culture, you don't hug. Koreans don't hug. That's just a thing. Koreans, they just don't do that, right? however, even, they had been trained because in Latin America, people are there's a lot of affection in Latin American culture, right? A lot of hugging, a lot of kissing and stuff. And so the Koreans had been trained basically to show affection. That wasn't natural to them because they were going to Ecuador, they were going to Latin America, right? And that kind of shows these things. But look, Jane, all of these countries, and you have to be very careful. And I just pointed out to you that North Korea and Cuba have a very different culture, and that means that the way people from the West react to it is going to be very different, but the same overall economic system. And you asking me this question, Jane, puts me in a very difficult position, because of the fact, Jane, that all of these countries are unique. The people in these countries have their own traditions, their own cultures, their own way of doing things, their own food, their own music, their own perspective, their own unique historical circumstances. And none of these countries appreciate being compared or likened or paralleled to other countries. They don't like that, right? Even that comparison I just made to Cuba and North Korea. There are probably Cubans that are deeply offended by what I just said. And there's probably North Koreans that are deeply offended by what I just said. People don't like that. I gotcha, Cam. I gotcha. You're on the list. People don't like that. People do not like that, right? How would you like it if someone came, you're from New Zealand? What if someone said, oh, New Zealand and Australia are exactly the same? Your accents are similar, and you would get very angry, right? Because New Zealand and Australia, there may be some similarities, right? But you're not the same. You're not the same people, right? You both might like Vegemite, right? That's a food that I think a lot of you like. New Zealanders like it, and Australians both like it. But New Zealand and Australia are culturally very different. New Zealand is much more social democratic and much more friendly to China. Australia is much closer to the United States, much more free market and oriented. New Zealand is much nicer to its indigenous people than Australia has been historically. Not that their record is perfect. I mean, it's, there's a whole, New Zealand and Australia are not the same country, right? It's not the same. And New Zealanders resent Australia. If I'm not mistaken, in the Australian Constitution, there's actually sections that allow Australia to annex New Zealand, and New Zealanders really don't appreciate that. They really don't appreciate that. And that, New Zealanders and Australians, they might sound the same. There may be some cultural overlap, but they don't like it. Neither of them like it. Australians don't like it if you think they're New Zealanders. New Zealanders don't like it if they're Australians. So you have to be really careful, right? You're asking me, if you wanted to experience life in an anti-imperialist country, which one should you go to? And what I'm telling you, Jane, is that all of these countries are unique. They all have their own history, right? And they're all different. The similarities flow from the way their economic and political system is different than the Western or neoliberal economic and political system. And that's where the similarities stop, right? And that there are certain similarities. Look, all of these governments, all anti-imperialist governments, depend on a well-organized population in order to stay in power. The Iranian government would not be in power for 2 days if they didn't have the Basij Council and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and all kinds of Iranians who swear allegiance to the supreme leader, Khamenei, and are ready to lay down their lives for Khamenei and enforce the will of Khamenei on a community and local level. And I've seen that with my own eyes. I've seen what the Basij councils look like. I've seen what the Revolutionary Guards are like. And that's why they're still in power. And, Daniel Ortega wouldn't be in power for 2 minutes in Nicaragua if it weren't for the Citizens Power Councils, the Sandinista Youth Leagues, the Revolutionary Community Militias. They have got a well-organized population, community assemblies that have their back. That's a similarity. But are Nicaragua and Iran similar in any other way? Well, they're Muslims in Iran. They're Christians in Nicaragua. Iran is in the Middle East. Nicaragua's in Central America. I mean, both of them are anti-imperialist countries. Both of them had a popular revolution in 1979. That's about it, though. That's really about it. They trade with each other. Iran and Nicaragua are very close. And their economic system where the state controls the means of production, but there's a private sector that flourishes, a lot of private hotels, a lot of restaurants, but the state kind of controls and subsidizes businesses and plans to make sure living standards continue to rise. 21st century socialism, and they don't even call it socialism in Iran. They call it, not capitalism, but Islam, the resistance economy, the Islamic resistance economy. They insist it's neither socialist nor capitalist. In Nicaragua, they call it Sandinista Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. But, neither of them are Marxists, right? In the classical sense, they're religious governments. The Sandinistas, the opening preamble of their constitution references Christianity in the Bible and says that they are true Christians practicing their faith in socialism. The Islamic Revolution of Iran, they denounce Marxism. Marxist parties are illegal in the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is an Islamic country. But the similarities in their political system, I just listed them, but that ends there. It absolutely ends there, right? Beyond those similarities, community assemblies are an ideological wing of the military, the government that comes out of the popular revolution that plans out the economy. Other than that, the similarities end. Iran and Nicaragua look nothing like each other. They're culturally completely different. The Persian people and the Nicaraguan people couldn't be more different from each other. And people don't like it when you make those kind of comparisons. People don't appreciate it because they feel like almost kind of like you're belittling their country's independence. And I've learned that the hard way. I've tried to make comparisons before as an American on the outside, and people don't like it. Right? Mitchell Sparks, he must be agreeing with me. I think he's a Russian, and he knows what that's like. When we Americans, we show up and we're like, oh, yes, Russia, you're kind of like China. You're kind of like Uzbekistan. You don't like that. People don't like that. That's kind of an ugly American thing to do, right? And we leftists, we feel like we have a license to do it. Those of us who understand Marxism and all that, we feel like we have a license because we're doing it from a Marxist perspective. It's still not appreciated, right? So I'm careful with that. I'm very, very careful with that. I'm very careful with all of that. But look, what I've come to realize, and this is a stray from the Marxist orthodoxy, right? What I've come to realize is that every country that is anti-imperialist is more or less socialistic. And that is just something that happens, right? People ask me, Caleb, Russia is a capitalist country. And I say, they definitely aren't communist anymore. They're not run by the Communist Party. They don't call their economy socialist. There was a huge amount of free market stuff in the 90s that devastated the country. The country was clearly dominated by the West and all of that. But Putin came into power as kind of a Bonapartist, was going to stabilize the economy, had the backing of the security services and other forces, and he recentered the economy around two state-run energy companies, Gazprom and Rosneft. And now, especially since the war in Ukraine has escalated, March of 2022, the Western countries have all barricaded Russia. So Russia's economy it's not doing business with the Western capitalist financial system very much. It's been pretty locked out of it. Now, India still does business with them. The Saudis still do business with them. Israel still does business with them. Brazil still does some business with them. But they've been largely barricaded and locked out of the Western capitalist economy. Meanwhile, they're doing business with China, guns blazing, going gangbusters, doing business with China. They're doing business with Vietnam. They're doing business with North Korea. They're doing business with Cuba. They just built a statue of Fidel Castro in Moscow. They're doing business with Venezuela. They're doing business with Iran. They're doing business with Nicaragua. And so you can tell me, oh, well, Russia's not socialist, Caleb. And you're probably right? There's a lot of income inequality there. There's a capitalist class that's very wealthy, and the government is kind of working with them and protects them. But there's a huge amount of state control and Bonapartism in Russia. I mean, the government, very much controls the economy, very much so. I mean, it's not a laissez-faire economy. I mean, it's very much, the economy is centered around two state-run energy companies. There's economic planning. There's a state-run titanium company. There's a state-run airline. There's a huge amount of state involvement in the economy. And all the countries that it trades with are all socialist countries. So you tell me that Russia is not a socialist country. Okay, I'm not saying you're wrong. But if it was, how would it be different? How would it be different if it was socialist? And you say, well, there wouldn't be as much inequality. Well, there's inequality in China. There's a new billionaire created every day in China. China's a socialist country, right? So I don't think, and they say, well, if it was a socialist country, they'd be preaching Marxist ideology. They don't believe in Marxist ideology anymore. Communist Party does, but the bulk of the Russian state, Russian Orthodox, they're proud of the achievements of the Soviet Union. Stalin is very popular in Russia. He's a national hero. 75% of Russians say the Soviet Union was the best time in their history, but they don't believe in Marxism. They are now a religious government. They have the Russian Orthodox Church as their state religion. They reject atheistic Marxism. They honor the Tsar as being martyred by the Bolsheviks. So, okay, but, Gaddafi in Libya, did he preach Marxism? I mean, he said it was not, it was Islamic socialism. He rejected Marxism in his Green Book. He said it was Islamic socialism. In Iran, they also reject Marxism, but Iran is clearly not a capitalist country. I mean, so it's like, okay, so you say Russia's not a socialist country. I mean, okay, I'm not going to disagree with you. I mean, the Russians don't think they're a socialist country, and they're not. I mean, they've repudiated Marxism. They reject the Soviet Union. The leadership that's in power doesn't want to ever bring the Soviet Union back. But it's like, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? And that's where we're getting to the essence of why I wrote my book, City Builders and Vandals, why I wrote the We Are City Builders Manual. Like, we're in a new ball game, and you can't do the Cold War thing where you're like, that's a communist, that's a capitalist. It's not that simple anymore. And what about these countries in Africa? A lot of countries in Africa that have never had a revolution, never had a change in property relations, but China is investing in them like crazy with its state-run companies, and it's building up their state-run industries, and their economy is very closely tied in with China's economy. And, they're very small in terms of GDP because they're underdeveloped African countries, and they're tied in with China and socialist China, and they're tied in with Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union. And, this kind of points to, in a weird kind of way, when Trotsky was talking about permanent revolution, his argument was, he said, you can't really have socialism in one country because that country is going to trade on the global market. Well, Trotsky's not completely wrong in saying that. Right? And that the line, this is a socialist country, this is not a socialist country. Look, people I think even Lenin didn't realize how important what he wrote in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, was. Because what Lenin was saying is, we're not fighting capitalism anymore. We're fighting imperialism. And socialism is going to come into the world on the basis of whole nations fighting to break out of imperialism. That's what Lenin's writing in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, that the capitalist global economy has changed to the point that the main enemy is not a factory owner struggling against his employees. The main enemy is this global financial system backed up by the Western government, centralized in Western banking institutions that dominates the world and holds back development. And the revolutionary energy, because of the stratification and the division of the working class in the Western countries, the revolutionary energy is going to be in the third world. It's going to be in the colonized countries of the world, struggling to break out of that system. And it won't just be the factory workers, the industrial workers of those countries. It's going to be the peasants. It's even going to be the capitalists of those countries, the national capitalists. And it's going to be struggles for national liberation from the domination of imperialism. It's going to create socialism. That's what Lenin writes, and he was clearly right. That's what happened in the 20th century. But then that raises the question. What is socialism? And that every country that breaks out of Western domination, more or less, has to align with communist governments around the world. Every country that breaks out of Western domination has to have a somewhat centrally planned economy. Every country that breaks out of Western capitalism, if you don't change the nature of the state, if your military doesn't become a revolutionary military, we saw this in Bolivia, right? They didn't change the military. The economy was largely socialistic, but the military was still dominated by pro-U.S. people. And so they had the coup, and they were able to remove Evo Morales. If you don't change the nature of the military, you don't stay in power. So you have to change the nature of the state. And on top of that, every country that breaks out of imperialism more or less has to have a centrally planned socialistic economy. So we're in a whole new ballpark. And that's when I talk about city builders and vandals. What is socialism? For Western social democracy, socialism is the government giving people free stuff. in order to stabilize the Western capitalist homelands so they can spread imperialism all over the world. That's what AOC's socialism is. This is, this is important stuff. I have, in my new book, I have this essay as an appendix, three socialist movements. Social democracy. The Marxism of Karl Marx, the Marxism of Engels devolved into the Marxism of Karl Kautsky, the Marxism of the British Labour Party, the Marxism of AOC, the Marxism of Denmark and Sweden. Social democracy means that in order to make sure that this Western financial system can dominate the world, we set up methods of stabilization. We have some nationalized industries here and there. We give people some free health care. We give people some free education so that we have the stability in the homeland that we need to dominate the planet. And that's social democracy. It's social imperialism. And that is AOC's socialism. That's Bernie Sanders' socialism. That's DSA's socialism. That our Western system can be more stabilized and can more effectively dominate the world if we do it smart. If the ultra rich, the Fabian Society in Britain, H.G. Wells, if we can stabilize this, if we can have the ultra rich impose controls, set up a welfare state, and we can kind of stabilize the Western system, it'll be more effective in dominating the world. That's social democracy. Fascism, fascism is another variation of that. It's the less nice version of that. Social democracy uses socialistic and Marxist language and tries to give people free stuff and is patting you on the head and says, we care about you. Fascism is big, mean, and scary. And fascism says we are going to forcibly degrow. We're going to create an underclass of slave laborers. We're going to commit genocide against sections of our population. We're going to completely militarize the economy. But ultimately, it's an effort to do the same thing, to stabilize the Western imperialist system so it can better dominate the world. German imperialism had been stripped of its colonies after World War I. And the only way it could get it back was the, German banker, Hallemer Schacht, the Krupps, the Tysons. They picked Hitler and they set up a fascist movement in order to impose heavy-handed control on the economy, to forcibly degrow sections of the population, militarize the economy so that they could re-seize their colonies. And that led to World War II. Same thing in Italy, right? Italy started, seizing colonies, Libya and Ethiopia, etc. And it's really social democracy and fascism. Neither of them are actually socialism. They're both attempts to stabilize the Western capitalist system with a heavy hand, with state control, in the hopes of strengthening imperialism. So social democracy, which is Marxism watered down and turned into a method for imperialism. Fascism, which is authoritarian right-wing Bonapartism. Both of them are not really socialism. But what socialism actually is, it started with the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, when the Bolsheviks took power. The first thing they did is they convened the Congress of the Peoples of the East. It was in Baku in Azerbaijan. You know who attended the Conference of the Peoples of the East? I'm going to start crying now. I get emotional about this stuff, because it's so pivotal. I've been attacked and smeared because I understand this, because I believe in this stuff. What was the first thing the Bolsheviks did after they took power? Well, not one of the first things, but it's one of the early things they did. They had a conference in Baku in Azerbaijan. And they invited people from China, and they invited people from Central Asia, and they invited people from Africa. The Conference of the Peoples of the East. They said, we will support anybody who fights against the colonialists. We'll support anyone who fights against the imperialists. Vladimir Lenin made friends with the Emir of Afghanistan. You think the Emir of Afghanistan was a communist? The Emir of Afghanistan, he was the king of Afghanistan, not a leftist, not a liberal, a conservative if there ever was one, an authoritarian, brutal, right-wing leader, the Emir of Afghanistan. I will link you. I will show you. This is an article. I'm dropping it in the chat. I will read it out loud to you. This is an article that Lenin, this is 1919. Very short. Comrade Lenin met with the ambassador in his private office, the ambassador of Afghanistan, with the words, "I am very glad to see in the red capital of the worker and peasant government the representative of the friendly Afghan people who are suffering and fighting against imperialist oppression." To which the ambassador replied, "I proffer you a friendly hand and hope that you will help the whole of the East to free itself from the yoke of European imperialism." During the talk that followed, Lenin said that Soviet power, the power of the working people and the oppressed, was striving toward the very goal the Afghan ambassador extraordinary had spoken about, but that it was necessary that the Muslim East should realize this and help Soviet Russia in her great war of liberation. To this, the ambassador replied that he could assert that the Muslim East realized this, and the hour was not far off when the world would see that there was no room for European imperialism in the East. Afterwards, the ambassador stood up, and with the words, he said, "I have the honor of presenting my sovereign letter to the head of the Free Russian Proletarian Government, and the hope that the Soviet government will give due consideration to the Afghan government in writing this." And he handed Lenin the Emir's letter. Comrade Lenin answered the letter that he accepted the letter with the greatest pleasure and promised shortly to give a reply to all questions of Afghanistan. The government of the Bolsheviks established relations with the Emir of Afghanistan, and they even offered military support to the Emir of Afghanistan because he was fighting the imperialists. He was fighting the British. They liked him, and they made friends with the Emir of Afghanistan. And that what started with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, it was already different than what classical Marxism had done. Vladimir Lenin, he formed a party of new type. This party of new type, the Bolshevik Party. And a lot of people said, this isn't a normal Marxist party. This is a cult. This is a monastic order. This is a religious sect. You're demanding people give the whole of their lives. You're operating like a religious organization. You're operating in secret. You're using methods from the Decembrists, from the old believers. This is like a Russian secret society that you're forming. And Lenin said, we're doing it different in Russia. He came up with this whole new model of how to form a new party. What is to be done? The vanguard party. And it wasn't the Western Marxists. They didn't like it. They said, this is weird. This is authoritarian. We don't like this. This is not the Western way of doing things. And they said, that's because we're in Russia. We're doing it our own way. And Lenin looked at the Western Marxist parties and said, these are debating societies. You're ultra democratic. You're fighting over the resolution. You're wasting our time. We're forming a Marxist combat party, a party of new type, a party of new type. That's what they called the Bolshevik Party. It was a non-Western thing. It was a break from Western Marxism. And then when the Soviet Union came into existence, they started supporting people in Africa, supported Marcus Garvey. They supported Afghanistan against the British. They wanted to support anybody who would fight the imperialists. They made friends with Dr. Sun Yat-sen. They gave military training to Chiang Kai-shek. And it was a new thing that came into existence that was rejecting the Western imperialist system. That's what it was. What started with Bolshevism, it was this new form of socialism that was saying we reject this global imperialist financial system of the West. And so because of that, we are going to align with anyone who will fight against it. And we realize that the people that break out of this Western financial capitalist system, it's going to be whole countries fighting for their national liberation who will break out of this system. So that is what we're going to do. Stalin is a step further. Stalin comes into power. And Stalin says, yeah, we're not going to, spread communism to the West. It's not going to happen. There's not going to be a revolution in Germany. There's not going to be a revolution in Britain. So we got to build socialism in one country. And Stalin, he says, look, he outlaws abortion. He outlaws homosexuality. And he starts modeling the aesthetics of the Soviet state on the Russian Orthodox Church. Right? They have pictures of Lenin everywhere, the halo around his head. Right? And Stalin is like the new czar. He's the great leader. He's the symbol of the nation. But he goes around encouraging people to work hard to industrialize the country. Women are working in factories alongside men. Women are getting an education, becoming leaders of the military. It's a change, but it's a compromise with the old system. And you can see elements of Tsarism, feudalism in it, but you can also see elements that are super modern. Right? Women in the military, women becoming electrical engineers, making great films like Eisenstein. It's a weird synthesis. Stalin takes it a little bit further. After Stalin dies, you have the Chinese Revolution. Mao, who'd originally been an anarchist from the peasantry, he'd studied the Taiping Rebellion, the Taiping Uprising. Mao becomes the leader of Chinese communism, even though the Soviet Union didn't like him. They tried to fire Mao on many different occasions, right? After Mao and the Chinese Soviet Republic were defeated, and they had to retreat after the Chinese Soviet Republic was crushed by Chiang Kai-shek. The Soviet Union, the Comintern, tried to impose, I think it was the 28 Bolsheviks on China, these 28 guys that had been trained in Moscow. And the Soviet Union said, these are the new bosses. And Mao said, over my dead body, ripped up the letter. Mao was in charge of the Red Army. And those 28 Bolsheviks, they didn't stand a chance. And, the Chinese Revolution was uniquely Chinese. And it developed its own methods, the mass line, criticism, self-criticism. It develops all kinds of uniquely Chinese ways of doing things, right? The Chinese Revolution is not a copy of the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolshevik Revolution is not Western Marxism. The Chinese Revolution is unique. Right? After the death of Mao Zedong, they start talking about socialism with Chinese characteristics. We can have a mixed economy, but the state must control the means of production. We can't have the chaos of the market, but we can have foreign investment. We can have free trade zones. We can have the market mechanisms, but the Chinese Communist Party is going to stay in power. The Soviet Union falls. The Chinese Communist Party stays in power. And socialist countries around the world realize that if they want to make socialism flourish, they need to be more like China. Vietnam adopts similar measures with their socialist-oriented market economy. Cuba is becoming more like China every day. North Korea wants to be more like Cuba. The Bolivarian revolutions happen in South America, and they're not traditional Marxist revolutions, right? They polarize the country. Are you for neoliberal cutbacks and domination by the Western bankers, or are you against it? And the communist parties and the national capitalists and the indigenous people, they form a bloc and they're able to get elected, but then they change the nature of the military. The Venezuelan military is trained in Cuba. They have a very big state sector in Venezuela, but the government controls the oil, and the government heavily controls and subsidizes the private sector and forces it to do what's in accordance with the overall state central plan. This is, the Sandinistas come back to power in Nicaragua on a similar platform where, they're polarizing the country. Are you for neoliberalism? Are you against it? They get back in power. They with their citizens power councils and their micro entrepreneurship programs, state central planning, they're able to kind of build an economy where profits are not in command, but a very big flourishing market sector. We're seeing socialism has left Europe. It is broken. Right? Socialism has come into existence. Socialism exists around the world, but it's not the socialism of Western factory workers rising up and seizing their factories. That's not what it is. It is whole nations breaking out of the domination of Western imperialism. and forming a new economy around the world that's based on growth and central planning. And that is socialism. Marx was right in pointing to the problem of overproduction and the tendency of the falling rate of profits and the instability of the capitalist system. He was right about that. Lenin was right in pointing out that capitalism had moved into its monopolistic imperialist stage and that whole nations were being subsidized, and that it would be the colonized people of the world that would create socialism because the revolutionary energy would no longer be in the West, because social democracy and the Marxist movement and the labor movement had turned into their opposites, had become mechanisms for stabilizing Western capitalism. Marx was right, Lenin was right, Stalin was right, realizing that in order to develop a system that was going to work in countries of the East, you couldn't, just have it be a Western open liberal society. You had to have some modernism, but you had to have some appeal to tradition. You had to model it in a certain way. 5-year economic plan. Stalin largely innovates what we consider to be the communist system during the Cold War. But Deng Xiaoping was right as well. And he said that Stalin model is good for about a generation. It gets you over the first hurdle. It industrializes the country. It electrifies the country. It builds the country up. But after you get to that point, you need market mechanisms, things like consumer goods. It doesn't handle so well. When it comes to the tech sector, you need innovation. So you need to have markets and you need to focus on economic growth. You can't redistribute poverty. You can't have everyone be equal in poverty. No, you have to focus on growth and building up the economy, right? And the goal is to create a world with so much wealth and abundance that inequality can fade away. But the goal must be raising living standards. Poverty is not socialism. To be rich is glorious, right? Deng Xiaoping was right. Bolivarianism is right. What they did in Latin America, appealing to the traditions of indigenous people and appealing to Christianity, creating a unique melding of different strands of their society to develop a model of socialism that would be applied to Latin America. It's brilliant. Islamic Revolution of Iran is brilliant. The construction jihads that were mobilized by Khomeini to go out and build up the country, not capitalism, but Islam, using the religious fervor of the Iranian people and the anti-imperialism, the hatred for the Western colonizers, the celebration of their tradition, of their religion, and the martyrdom and the sacrifice, and the Shia tradition of standing with the oppressed. All of this is brilliant. Anti-imperialism has created a new economy. The BRICS, the Belt and Road, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America. There is another economy in the world today. And that economy doesn't just exist within the borders of these countries. It exists beyond the borders. It's all over Africa. There are countries that are trading with this new economy. All over the African continent it exists. All over the Middle East. They call it the axis of resistance. You got the Houthis in Yemen. You got Hezbollah in Iran. You got, a big section of Iraq that is tied in with the Iranian economy. You've got, even Afghanistan now is starting to do business with China, and it's complicated. The Taliban, it's a push and pull, but it's complicated. But something new is happening. Something new is happening. And if you just are stuck in the past, and if you just want to play this game like it's the 1980s, and you can be like, well, that's a communist government. That's a Marxist-Leninist communist government aligned with the Soviet Union. And that ain't. You're missing the boat. You're missing the boat. And there's a lot of people who want to look at Venezuela. They want to look at Iran. They want to look at Nicaragua. They even want to look at China, Cuba, and they want to shout at them. They say, well, you're not the way it's supposed to be. You're not the way it's supposed to be. Maybe they aren't. But what is the way it's supposed to be? The way it's supposed to be is that this whole imperialist system is supposed to be gone. The way it's supposed to be is that these countries aren't supposed to be kept in chronic poverty so that Wall Street bankers can keep their monopoly. The way it's supposed to be is the whole world is supposed to be trading with everybody else. And we're all supposed to be rising out of poverty. And we're supposed to have a global economy where we use resources in a rational way, where we strategically orient things so that technology leads to a better, more fulfilling, and beautiful life for everybody. The way it's supposed to be is full communism. They don't have that in China. They don't have that in Korea. They don't have that in Latin America. So you can point at the anti-imperialist states that exist and shout, that's not the way it's supposed to be. Great. And what does that achieve? What are you achieving by doing that? I'm talking about what exists. There are two forces in the world today. There are two camps that exist, and they don't want it that way. We don't want to divide the world into camps. We don't want a new Cold War, but that's the way it's becoming. There is an anti-imperialist economy in the world today, and there is the dying Western financial system that is trying to impose degrowth and starvation and depopulation in order to keep itself in power because it can't handle human progress. Because human progress can't be crammed into the irrational restraints of a profit-oriented system. So there's one section of the world that has broken out of that profit-oriented Western system, that is marching ahead, and there is a dying, irrational, vicious Western system run by the World Economic Forum and the big banks and the big super major oil companies and the Silicon Valley tech monopolists, the Silicon Valley fascists. And they're trying to stay on top of the world by keeping it poor. Imagine a game of King of the Mountain. Right? You ever play King of the Mountain when you're a kid on a little hill? Imagine one kid gets to the top and he says, now the game is over. The game must end now because I'm at the top. That's what the Western imperialists are doing. The game must end because they are at the top. I'll get to you, Molly. Don't worry. That's what's happening in the world today. And the game isn't going to end. And humanity is not going to stop. We're not going to stop having children. We're not going to stop inventing new technology. We're not going to stop raising countries out of poverty. We're not going to stop industrializing. We're not going to stop. Humanity will not stop. And that's very American, right? That's some of that motor-mindedness, Anna Louise Strong. That's what America used to always be about, right? We were a land of immigrants, of people who go and start their own businesses and achieve their dreams. And we go out and we build and we construct. We're motor-minded. We're associated with action. We get things done. That's the American way. Africa is becoming more American. China is becoming more American. Russia is becoming more American. Latin America is becoming more American. And here in America, they're trying their hardest to cram the genie back into the bottle. They're trying to tell us you can't be American, you can't be motor-minded, you can't be optimistic, you can't be hopeful, you can't be entrepreneurial anymore because we've got to save capitalism. Because we got to save our system, we got to save the planet, we got to save whatever. That's what they think it is. That's the reality of the world that we face in our time. Growth is battling degrowth. Socialism of a different type, whatever started in 1917, looks completely different now, but it started in 1917. Something that started in 1917 and has gone through a lot of different leaps and evolutions is still alive and is flourishing. And the Western system that tried social democracy, that tried fascism, is crashing and burning. And that's what's going on in our world today. And so the question is, which side are you on? I can answer that question very easily. I'm on the side of the emerging economy. I'm on the side of human growth and creativity. I'm on the side of rising and growing and eliminating poverty and eliminating scarcity and expanding the human population and achieving new heights of creativity. That's the side I'm on. And that's the American way. Right? That's nothing more American, nothing more patriotic than that. That's, I might as well be eating a hot dog. I might as well have the American flag behind me and the Battle Hymn of the Republic playing. right? I mean, this doesn't get more American than that. I'm on the American side, but America is no longer American. That motor-mindedness, that optimism, that hope people used to associate with America is gone from the American leaders. Now they're preaching pessimism and death. Now they're preaching degrowth. When I went to Yalta, to the World Economic, not the Yalta Economic Forum, not the World Economic Forum, the Yalta Economic Forum, when I listened to what the leaders said at the World Festival of Youth and Students in Sochi, Russia in 2017, and I listened to Putin talk to the kids about their science projects, when I listened to Jack Ma speak at the Valdi Discussion Club and explain why he's optimistic about technology despite the problems created by computers, this is what's going on in the world today. There are two systems that are at war with each other. They shouldn't be at war with each other. And in fact, what is happening in Asia and Africa and Latin America is that they're starting to have what America used to have, that growth and innovation, that optimism. And I love America. I love the American people. It took me a while. I had to get through my 20s. I had to get through my alienation. I had to deal with my own personal trauma, my own personal history. But I love America. I love Jesus Christ. And I see what's going on in the world today. And I see that deep in our souls, we Americans, we have more in common with what's happening in Russia and China and Venezuela and Vietnam and Iran than we do with what's happening over here. Our society is sick. People are killing themselves. People are dying of opioids. They're shooting heroin into their veins and dying. Our roads are falling apart. This isn't what America is supposed to be. Yes, America was founded on slavery and racism. Yes, America has an ugly, ugly history. But the reason that America prevailed, despite all that evil, was because of that hope, that optimism, that action-oriented motor-mindedness. And that is what they're trying to beat out of us right now. They are trying to beat our Americanism right out of us right now. And they're trying to beat our American out of us now. They're trying to poison us with our phones, pessimism, hopelessness, climate anxiety. They are trying to de-Americanize America so that they can save their system. When what we Americans want, when I go to Yalta Economic Forum, when I go to I've been there, right? I've been to Iran. I was in Brazil at the conference, the World, the World Trade Union Center. Eurasia is growing there. And it's that desire to grow. It's the desire that we're going to have the state control the means of production. The state will organize the economy to make sure that we grow, to make sure that human creativity and innovation is, when I go to Russia, I go to events where they have their high-achieving young people. They're young people that have the highest test scores in the country. They're young people that are the star athletes, and they're telling them, we want you to succeed. We want you to go out and build a strong Russia. Right? I mean, I'm telling you that I understand what's happening in the world today. And this isn't classical Marxism. If you just, classical Marxism, you got to read it. It's the foundations. Go and read Marx. Go and read Lenin. Read Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Read Lenin on the national question. Read Imperialism and the Split in Socialism by Lenin. Right? Read Stalin and the foundations of Leninism. Read Marxism or Anarchism by Stalin. Read Mao talk on the question of philosophy, a brilliant, brilliant lecture that Mao Zedong gave in 1964 to a group of college students. Go and read the letter to the American workers that Lenin wrote. We have a whole textbook we created as the Center for Political Innovation, as a whole bunch of classical Marxist texts as well as American text. Go and read. You gotta know the foundations. But I'm telling you, we're in a new ballpark now. Something new is happening in the world. It's imperialism. That imperialist system that Lenin described is dying. And this new thing that Lenin created to fight imperialism. That started with the Bolsheviks and has completely changed now. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't look like the Soviet Union no more. It looked different with Stalin. It looked different with Deng, and now it looks completely different. In some cases, it's very opposed to Marxism. But there's this new thing in the world that's battling the imperialists. And that new thing is something that we Americans need. The only way we can get out of that crisis that we are in as a country right now is if we embrace the new thing. We have to find our own form of the new thing here in America. We have to find a uniquely American version of this new thing. You don't want to call it socialism. I like to call it 21st century socialism, anti-imperialism, resistance economy, whatever you want to call it. The only way we can get out of the mess that our society is in right now is if we figure out how to make American version of that new thing. We need an American form of 21st century socialism. That's what we need. That's the only way we can get out of this. And no, it won't be social democracy. It won't be giving people free stuff to stabilize the economy. Definitely won't be fascism, creating concentration camps and, driving the population down with eugenics. No. The only way out of this is the American version of that new thing. Whatever you want to call that new thing, I call it 21st century socialism. I think it's socialism. Maybe you disagree with me. It's not socialism, Caleb. It's not socialism. No, it has a market sector. It's not socialism, Caleb. It's not a state-run economy run by a Marxist-Leninist party. Okay, whatever you want to call it. But that new thing that exists in the world today, that's the future. And the only way our country is going to get out of the rut it's in is if we adopt that new thing. And you can hate that new thing all you want, and you can hold up your Marxist books, you can hold up Mao and say, no, that new thing it's not what it's supposed to be. Well, so what? None of the world is as it's supposed to be. Until we have full communism, until we have a world of vast material abundance without inequality, the world isn't going to be as it's supposed to be. The question is, are we moving toward that ultimate goal, or are we dying? That's the question. And part of this world is moving in the right direction. It's moving toward a new world. And part of this world is dying. And I see death all around me in America. I see homeless people on the street. I see bridges and roads that are falling apart. I see syringes. I see syringes in the subway station. I see piss and urine everywhere. I see people committing suicide. I see people who won't speak to their family members because of some stupid political thing. I see it. We have death over here in America. There's death everywhere. This country smells of death, hopelessness, pessimism, death. It's everywhere. And the socialism that we bring, we have to bring a socialism that's the antidote to that. So, that's what I believe. I just told you what I believe. Take it or leave it. That's what I believe. So, am I a genuine communist? Am I a genuine Marxist-Leninist? Am I true to the classical Marxist-Leninist principles? I don't know. But so what? So what? I just told you the way the world is, and you can take that and you can agree with it or you can disagree with it. You can accept it or you can reject it. That's what I believe. All right. I think that answered this question as well. I think that was a pretty thorough answer to that question. All right. Doral in Florida is known as Doralzuela. Doral in Florida is known as Doralzuela. So that means there's a lot of Venezuelans who live in Doral? Is that what that means? That a lot of Venezuelans live in Doral? I mean, I don't know. I've never been to Doral, Florida, so I can't answer the question. Looking for a reliable textbook of reliable literature in textbook form explaining historical and dialectical materialist concepts for lay people. Any ideas? Well, yep. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Why, yes, Cam. Cam's asking the question. I've got a couple of them here. Couple of them, right? I think I've got a book that's just called Dialectical Materialism. Well, actually, this book, Anarchism or Socialism by Stalin, the opening of the book, right? The very opening of the book is the first chapter is called The Dialectical Method. And it just explains dialectical materialism. That's Stalin starts by explaining dialectics. And then from there, he polemicizes with the anarchists. So if you're looking for that, that might be a good place to start. If you're looking for just a basic explanation. I made a video, one of my most popular videos. It's got like thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of views. It's called What is Dialectical Materialism? Very popular. So you can watch my video on it. Somewhere I do have an old Soviet book called Dialectical Materialism. And look, I recommend read the textbooks, right? My belief, right, is that if you try to read the classics, here it is. So here are two textbooks, two Soviet textbooks on dialectical materialism. This one's called Dialectical Materialism by David Guest. Dialectical Materialism, a textbook by David Guest. I would recommend that might be a good place to start. Right? And then, right, if you're looking for books on dialectical materialism, this is a book called Dialectics, The Logic of Marxism, Its Critics, and an Essay and Exploration by T.A. Jackson. Dialectics. Look, I think, and I will say this, it is better to start with textbooks. I think I can put these back because it's better to start with textbooks. It's way better to start with textbooks than it is to start with the classics, because the Marxist classics are all polemics, right? They're all polemics. The way Marxists write is they write arguments with other Marxists, with other socialists. That's generally what it is, right? So Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism by Lenin, it's a great book, but it's a polemic. He's arguing against all the other Marxists. So if you don't know the basics, you don't know the context, you're going to be confused. He's talking about the collapse of the Second International. So I would start with a textbook. Read The Fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism, a great textbook published in the Soviet Union. Read The History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster. I would start with those two. You read those, you'll get a foundation, you'll understand it, and then from there, read the classics. You have to know the context first. So there we go. All right. Thank you, Cam. Much appreciated. Thank you, Mitchell. Thank you. I do appreciate it. You're a Russian. Everyone in Russia has my support right now. I pray every day for the Russian people. I mean, it is, what your country is up against. And I mean, the United States, I'm doing everything I can to build an anti-imperialist movement over here. Russia is not our enemy. Our enemy is on Wall Street. Our enemy is the satanic group that controls this country and is grinding our country into poverty. I am on Russia's side against the imperialists. Absolutely. And most of the American people say we've given way too much money to Ukraine. Not too little, too much. And, the American people in their bones, whether they know it or not, they're on your side. So there you go. Molly McGuire says, I really enjoyed the clip you dropped the other day covering your history of activism. Thank you. Watching it made me anxious to do something. Great hair, by the way. Well, thank you, Molly. Thank you. I get my hair cut once a month. It kind of grows in, it takes a couple of weeks for it to grow in. And after a while, it gets too long and then I have to cut it again. I only go to the barber once a month. My barber's a great guy here in the neighborhood. Palestinian guy, very friendly. He always teaches me a lot when he cuts my hair. I dropped that clip for a reason, which is that, it frustrates me. I'll just be honest with you all that, I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this a really long time. And there's a lot of people who, have been convinced I'm just a white supremacist pretending to be a communist. I don't get it. I've been doing this my whole life. And my record as an anti-imperialist, as somebody who as my record is quite long. I've been doing this a long time. And I guess I'm frustrated, number one, by people who pretend, I mean, it's common knowledge. Oh, he's a white supremacist. How am I a white supremacist? I mean, there's people think they've watched some bread tube video of me, and that they know everything there is to know about me. And it's like, I've been doing this a really long time, and, I get frustrated, and, and if you don't highlight your own record, how can you expect anyone else to? Right. I mean, it's weird, but it's like they've done everything they can to obscure, I mean, to kind of conceal who I really am from people. I get people tweeting at me, I mean, the people who attack me have never done any of their research. People say to me, oh, you lost your job at RT. When did I lose my job at RT? I've been working at RT for 7 years now. Not one pause, but it's like all these people, Vosh said it. He lost his job at RT. I never lost my job at RT. I have never once. I have been working from RT nonstop for 7 years. Now, RT America shut down, but I'm still working for Moscow. I do reports every day practically. I was on there today. I was on there yesterday. I mean, but in these attacks, oh, you lost your job at RT. I never lost my job at RT. They don't, and you would know that. Just look at this YouTube channel. How many RT videos are there on this YouTube channel? How many of them? There's loads of RT videos on this YouTube channel. But these people, they never looked at any of my stuff. They never looked at any of my stuff. They just heard about me on Vosh. They heard about me from Thought Slime, and they think they know about me. They don't know anything about me. They don't know what I believe. They just know what my face looks like. They know my image, right? And they know I'm bad. And you press these people, and then they'll say wildly inaccurate things. And they don't know anything. They'll say, well, didn't you meet with a neo-Nazi? No, I met with Alexander Dugin, who's not a Nazi. He's a Russian intellectual who's very important and has denounced fascism, but also is against communism. He has his own view, but he's not a neo-Nazi. Oh, yeah, but you're still like bad. How am I bad? Well, didn't you? And it's like, no, I'm not accused of anything that wasn't consensual. Some consensual things happened with me and somebody in my organization, and some people got mad about it, right? And, got to keep your sex life out of the group. Fine, but I didn't do anything that wasn't completely consensual with completely consenting adults. Well, yeah, but there's still just got to be some way that you're bad. Why? Because you're bad. Because the internet said you're bad, and you just have to be bad. Everyone knows you're bad. I'm not bad. Like, I mean, all the things people think they know about me are not fucking true, right? I'm in an interracial marriage. I've been, I recorded an act of police brutality and got people acquitted. And these people, they don't know anything. Right. And they're like, oh, I get people tweeting at me, oh, it must suck not working at RT. I still work at RT. I've been working. I mean, how many RT videos are there on my channel? They don't know anything about me. But all these people, they just got the memo from these hateful bread tube videos that he's bad. And then they get the facts completely wrong. They don't know anything about anything. They're like, but he's bad. Here's something I don't understand. If you want to lie about somebody, right? I mean, people lie. I get that. Why do you lie about something I said? Right? Because anyone who really investigates can see what I actually said. There is so much lying about what people said. Like RFK was on there, right? They say that he didn't say anything negative about Jews. All he said was that there was a study that indicated that Jews and Chinese people are not affected as badly from the COVID virus as other ethnic groups. That's all he said. And they're saying he said, that COVID was a Jewish conspiracy. No, he didn't. He blamed COVID on the Jews. No, he didn't. He promoted anti-Asian hate crimes. No, he didn't. All he did is he referenced there was one study, which he has pulled up and referenced many times, that said, and then from there he pointed out, and this is the thing that boggles my mind. This should be the front page headline. Is that it's been proven that the U.S. government is trying to design viruses that will kill people on the basis of their race. Maybe I'll show the clip again. I will show the clip again because it's like, this is what we should be talking about. Not, oh, does he hate the Jews? No, let's talk about what he said. This is huge. This is what he said. This is what we should be debating. This should be on all the front pages. And the journalists should be getting to the bottom of this, because if this is true, this is huge.
Weapons. That's what all of those labs in the Ukraine are about. They're collecting Russian DNA. They're collecting Chinese DNA so that we can target people by.
Did you hear what he just said?
Are developing ethnic bioweapons. That's we are developing ethnic bioweapons. That's what
we are developing ethnic bioweapons.
All of those labs in the Ukraine are about.
That's what all of those labs in the Ukraine are about.
They're collecting Russian DNA.
They're collecting Russian DNA.
They're collecting Chinese DNA.
They're collecting Chinese DNA.
So that we can target people by.
So we can target people by race. Holy shit. If that is not a big fucking deal, that should be on the front page of every newspaper. If that's true, which I believe he probably wouldn't have said it if it wasn't true. And I also don't think, Russia has put forward a lot of evidence about these biolabs at the UN. If they are indeed developing germs that will kill people on the basis of their race, that is genocide. That is Nazi level war crimes. That is huge. And you notice they don't say anything about it. And that's how you know it's probably true, because they've changed the subject. He said the Jews. He didn't say the Jews. He just said he noticed that according to one study, COVID, doesn't kill Jews and Chinese people as much as it kills other races. That's all he said. And then from there, he pointed to something huge, which is that it appears the American government is trying to develop weapons that will kill people on the basis of their race. That is a Nazi war crime. That's Nuremberg level shit. That's Dr. Mengele level evil. Now, it looks to me like that might be true, but that should be a scandal. That should be a scandal. And, and again, why can't they, they don't want to lie about him, call him an axe murderer, call him a rapist, but don't lie about what he said, because people can just look, but they don't look. They just blast everywhere. Oh, he said this. And that's what they do to me. They do that to me endlessly, right? I have seen more lies about my comeback video, in November. They say, well, he never apologized. I did. I apologized for bringing my personal life into the organization. Right. Well, they say they say, well, he said he did it because he was abused as a child. No, I did not say that. At no point did I ever make that claim, that I say that my own actions are caused by. That's not what I said at all. And it's like these people, they just lie. Right. I've had people say, this is my favorite one. And the person who did this can eat shit too, because he knows better. I heard this was floating around, that I compared what was done to me, exposing my personal life, to the murder of Dari Dugina. No, I did not. I pointed out that they happened around the same time. That's all I did. I didn't compare them. Dari Dugina was murdered. She was killed. I had a bunch of people, talking shit about me on the internet. Very big difference. I just pointed out that, that what happened to Dari Dugina happened hours after they smeared me. And just a couple days later, they then smeared the Party of Communists, and their website was commandeered and they got accused of similar things. Their website was seized, and that the timing was very suspicious. All these people, they just lie. And the lies are never, it's like they can't actually respond to what I say. So what they do is they find some kind of like gross distortion of what I've said, and they say, well, he said this, and then they win the argument. It is, yeah, I'm on the fucking Ukrainian kill list, for Christ's sakes. I'm on the fucking Ukrainian kill list. Okay? Like, how can people not get their minds around this? I'm on the goddamn Ukrainian kill list, right? They sent a lot of people to dig into my personal life, to dig into all kinds of stuff. And all they could come up with, and there's no reason to rehash all of this again. We don't want to, it's been almost a year, for Christ's sakes, but all they could come up with was, I don't even want to repeat it. Something mild happened, right? That was completely consensual. And they did their best to try and make that into something else, which it wasn't, right? And And they wrote a long, complicated manifesto that goes on for pages because they don't want anyone to actually read it because they don't have anything. They had nothing. There was nothing there. All they revealed was that I have some personal issues to deal with that are no one's goddamn business, that are personal and private and don't belong on the goddamn internet. All they did was dig into my personal life and reveal private things about me that don't belong on the goddamn internet. That's it. It was a nasty, evil thing to do. And they hoped that I would be so ashamed and so embarrassed to see private, personal stuff that doesn't belong on the goddamn internet, on the internet, that I would just collapse, that I would fall over. That's what they were hoping. They were hoping, let's reveal some deep, personal, private things about Caleb and stuff that's private. And we'll embarrass him, we'll embarrass his wife, we'll embarrass his family, we'll drudge up all kinds of pain, we'll humiliate him, and then he'll disappear. That's what they hoped they could do. And did it work? No, because I'm right here, motherfuckers. I'm right here. And you know how many people in my audience saw through this immediately? They saw through it immediately. Because I'm not the only person who has a private life. I'm not the only person who has a private life, who has trauma in their past, who has had to deal with shit. All right? Right? A lot of people in America have had to deal with shit. And I'm not going to get into details about it because it's not worth getting into. A lot of people can relate to what I've been through. A lot of people can relate to how I've been affected by what I've been through. A lot of people have private lives. And that has nothing to do with what I'm doing. You know, was I wrong to have ever engaged with anyone in my organization in a sexual way? Yes. And I will never make that mistake again. And I've gone to recovery for sex addiction, and you're right. You know, if you are in a leadership role in an organization, you have to keep your sex life out of the group. And I have apologized for that. And I apologize for that again, right? You have to keep your sex life out of the group. Now, the only reason people knew about things was because they knew me before the group really got going. And that's a whole nother story. So I didn't bring it into the group after it was going. It was this person already knew some of my private business from before the group had really gotten going. It doesn't matter, right? That I will apologize for because I was wrong. You have to keep your sex life out of a group. That's it, right? And these people, I mean, they have tried to destroy me with this, right? They tried to destroy me on this front. They have just gone all out. And so I went away for a little bit because that's what you should do. You should, and also because they wanted to rehash every detail. They want to have a fight with me about every detail. And that's why they lie so much, because they want me to come back and say, actually, no, what happened was they want to rehash every detail. They wanted to make the victim, which not a victim because I'm not accused of anything that wasn't consensual. They wanted to make the victim into a celebrity. They wanted, one of the people wanted to get attention from this. And so I just had to disappear for a little bit. And then I came back and I gave my answer to it. And now people lie about my answer. They lie about what the accusations actually are, and they lie about my answer. One of the people who signed the document has actually publicly apologized to me and admitted, quote, we lied multiple times. Yankee Tanky. We're still not friends. I have to keep a distance from him because the fact that he was able to get manipulated into doing that means that he's not trustworthy. Okay. And I don't endorse that person. He's not part of CPI. He'll never be back in CPI, and he's not part of my life. But look at Yankee Tanky. He has admitted over and over and over again that was a Fed operation. He's admitted we lied over and over and over again. He's tweeted out, we lied, we lied, we lied, we lied, we lied. It was not a cult. Caleb did not exploit me. He lied. So one of the people who signed it has repudiated, has admitted that. And he's not the only one, too. Other signatories, it's gotten back to me, are privately telling people they know they were wrong. So that whole thing was just pure bullshit. And that's why they're ignoring me right now. That's why they're ignoring me right now. They want to have an end to the story, right? I still get people tweeting at me, CPI dissolved. CPI dissolved for 2 months, and now it's back. All right. But they want to have an end to the story. They want to just pretend, oh, Caleb just went away. No, I didn't. We had a huge event February 19th after the Rage Against the War Machine rally. We had a huge event in March, the Summit Against Hypocrisy. We just had a huge event in New York City. We just had a training school in Missouri. We've got more funding coming in now than we ever had before. We got more activity. And now all the losers are gone. All the wreckers and backstabbers are gone. That's great. And I'm glad. I'm glad they're gone because now we have an energy like you would never believe. Elizabeth Young stepped up to the plate. She's leading our organization. We're doing great stuff now. So I'm here. I'm still here. But what I can't get over, right? And this is what gets me fired up. And thank you, Panos. I do appreciate that. What gets me going and what gets me frustrated is that there's all these people who supposedly agree with me. They support Russia and Ukraine. They're anti-imperialist, but they have decided to boycott me now. Right? I'm not going to name names. I mean, some of them are obvious, but some of them are less obvious. And I don't want to completely burn bridges with people. And that's why I'm not going to name names. But, I'm out here doing the work, and these people don't generally do real organizing. They don't, right? They just kind of are on the internet being anti-imperialist. And they've all decided, well, we're going to boycott Caleb. Why? No reason, right? And it gets back to me. I hear that they're telling people he should stop organizing. Well, you know what? Thanks, Gala. I have always been an organizer. In Cleveland, I was organizing against police brutality. I was organizing Occupy Wall Street. I was organizing with the International Action Center, Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General. I have always been an organizer. This is about winning. It's about building a real organization. So I don't understand these people who think this is just, I can just get on the internet and talk about shit. And then if I was doing that, I'd be talking about sports, basketball, football, horror movies. I love the Hammer films, Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee. I'd be talking about horror movies, but the point of these ideas, everything I'm talking about on here is because we want to actually win. If there was not any intent of actually winning, what would be the point of doing any of this? And that's what I don't get. These people are like, stop organizing. What does that look like? What am I going to do? Become a ditch digger? Am I going to become an insurance salesman? I used to do that. I used to sell insurance. I wasn't a salesman. I didn't have a license, but I was like an insurance marketer. I was in insurance marketing. So what do? It's like, they're like, just be a grifter like us. Just get on the internet and say America sucks and collect a paycheck and you'll be fine. Well, no. The point isn't to just comment on the world. The point isn't to just play your fiddle while Rome burns. The point is to win. The point is to win. The point is to actually change the world, to actually make the world a better place. That's the point. The point is to actually change the world. The point is to actually save your country. That's the point. So no, when you say stop organizing, what does that mean? What is that? I don't even know what that means. I don't know how I could. I don't know how I could do that. The point is to save the world from this insanity. I believe in everything I'm doing, and that when I hear that from people, and I hear people say I should stop organizing, an alarm bell goes off in my head. Ding, 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 ding. These people don't really believe in what they're doing. That's what that says to me. They don't really believe in what they're doing. Because you're right, these people aren't organizing. It is just a big game to them. It's just a way to try to get clicks and likes, build up a fandom. No, for me, I'm building a real organization. And building a real organization is much more dangerous. Much more dangerous. They never would have had access to get close to me to find out personal shit to embarrass me with. They would never have had that if I'd just been an internet guy. Well, there you go. Look, folks, there is no choice. And I am starting to come to terms with the fact that I am an activist. I am an organizer. It's funny because that was always the attack that was leveled against me before, was that I wasn't enough of an activist. I was just an intellectual. I was too bookish. Oh, you're not a real activist. You read all the books, but you don't do real organizing. That was always thrown at me. The Workers' World Party people were always saying, you're too intellectual. You're too bookish. You're not a real organizer. You're not a real activist. That was constantly being thrown at me. Now I'm in this world. And it's like, oh, you should stop organizing. Well, no, I'm going to keep organizing. But my activism is guided by my anti-imperialist principles. It's guided by my understanding of socialism and anti-imperialism. And it's because my activism is connected with real organizing that I feel like I have a more realistic approach. Look, if you're not connected to anything, you're not connected to the actual anti-imperialist movement, you can sit there and be like, oh, we need to go back to Enver Hoxha. If only we could follow Enver Hoxha, right? Well, in the real world, when you have to be attached to really existing social forces, you're not going to talk that way, right? You can be a Trotskyite if you're just on the internet blathering, but if you're attached to really existing social forces, you can't do that, right? That the reason that I understand what's going on around the world, the reason for that is because I'm connected to real forces and I'm building a real organization, right? All of my activism is guided by being connected to real social forces, by anti-imperialism, and that forces me to develop a deeper understanding of things. Profits barely function in a degrowth inflationary environment with decreasing goods and services. Rationality and holism needs to return to humanity and the market. I agree. Fascism, the essence of fascism is degrowth. The essence of fascist economics is degrowth. Malthusianism and fascism are intrinsically connected with each other because they're rooted in the idea that you can save a capitalist economy by degrowing, right? It's about vastly reducing consumption, engaging in mass destruction to stabilize a capitalist economy. That is the basis of fascism. And socialism says, no, we can just rationally organize the economy and we can grow beyond anything. That is the difference, right? That is the difference. Fascism never really overcomes property relations. It's just heavy-handed state mechanisms to try and force the genie back into the bottle, trying to force degrowth. Socialism is getting beyond the irrationality of the market, so there's no more restraints on growth. That's the difference between fascism and socialism. Right? Socialism is changing property relations so that growth is no longer restrained and we can reach that ultimate goal of a stateless, classless world. Communism. And look, I've gotten a lot more religious in the past year. I know that. And for some of you, that might be hard to swallow. Okay. And I know that. Look, I didn't want to hear anything about religion when I was 19. I grew up in a small town full of evangelicals. I became an atheist when I was a teenager because I was so sick of religion. And I was just so anti-religious because I had evangelical right-wing Christianity thrown at me so much. It was just constantly thrown at me. And because of that, I didn't want to hear anything about Christianity. I didn't want to hear anything about religion because for so many people that I tried to talk to about the U.S. invasion of Iraq and why it was wrong, religion was just their excuse not to think. And so I was very opposed to religion. I was very much an atheist when I was a teenager, when I was in college. And it's been a long road back to Christ, and that's a whole nother stream, and I don't have time for that. But even if you are somebody who is very anti-religious, as I once was, I think you should watch my Faith and Socialism workshop. The Faith and Socialism workshop I did in Missouri is on the YouTube channel here. It's got 1,000 views already. People are watching it. And it's a perspective it's definitely unique. Let me just put it that way. It is a perspective you won't get very many other places. And I would encourage you to go watch it, right? Because and the input from various CPI members, there's somebody who speaks who's got a Muslim background. There's somebody who speaks who's it's beautiful to hear the diversity of religious opinion and perspective that's in the Center for Political Innovation, right? We are an organization that is friendly to religion, but we have a variety of religious views. And this is the Faith and Socialism workshop that I did in Missouri. I would encourage you to go watch it. Because one of the things that I talk about in that workshop is I talk about how the Christian narrative of human history and the communist narrative of human history are very similar. Christianity says we started in the Garden of Eden. And in the Garden of Eden, we didn't have to work. We didn't have to grow our own food. We didn't domesticate animals. We had all that we needed. But at some point, we ate of the fruit. We acquired forbidden knowledge. We got kicked out of the garden. So now we have to work. We have the sweat of our brow. We have to grow our own food. And there's been all this turmoil. All of that led, according to Christianity, to the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ came into the world. Jesus Christ gave us Christianity. He started the church. He started Christianity. And the understanding is that Christianity flourishes, the church comes along, Christianity grows. Eventually, that will lead to a big battle with the forces of evil. And out of that battle will come Eden restored. And again, we'll have Eden again. We'll have a society, a world again, where nothing dies, where there's abundance for all, where people live in harmony with one another, where no one is poor, right? That's what Christianity says. Communism says the same thing. Primitive communism. We originally had a world where we were hunters and gatherers, and we shared all things in common. And the world was in perfect balance because we were hunters and gatherers. We hunted and gathered, but we got too good at hunting and gathering. We acquired some forbidden knowledge. We developed spears and rocks. We got too good at hunting and gathering. So we started having to have class society, and that created all this turmoil. But class society, we went from slavery to feudalism and finally to capitalism. Out of capitalism came the proletariat, the men of no property, the working class. The final class of history. The proletariat came into existence. And the proletariat built the proletarian movement, the movement for the emancipation of the proletariat. And out of the emancipation of the proletariat, the working class, can come socialism. And socialism can lead to higher communism, to a society, again, where there's no inequality, where the world is in balance, where people have what they need to survive. It's the same belief system. And you know who knows that? Fascists. The enemy knows that. Friedrich Nietzsche hated communism, and he said it's nothing but Christianity. And so did Oswald Spengler. Oswald Spengler said that, the same thing. The anti-communists all know that. Ayn Rand, she said they're the same thing. She said Christianity was the guilt-peddling Jesus industry, and she saw communism and Christianity as the same thing. And Nietzsche saw it, and Oswald Spengler saw it, and all the right-wing people, they can all see it. Right? That it is an ideology that believes in the goodness of human beings, that believes we can reach Eden restored, we can reach the higher plane. It's the same narrative. And the forces of liberalism, of radical individualism, the atomization that dominates the West now, they can see that. They see that a mile away. They can tell that. You listen to Bill Maher. I remember he was saying on one of his shows, North Korea, their communism is a lot like Christianity. Right? He's attacking the Church of Scientology. It's a lot like communism. Right? They can tell. The new atheists, the libertarians, the radical individualists, they see communism and Christianity as cut from the same cloth. And I think they're right. And I think that, Marx, the anti-religiousness, that made sense in the time that Marx existed. It made perfect sense. Because religion had been a tool of feudalism. Religion was anti-science. It was a propping up the old system. So go and watch the workshop. I'm not going to redo the whole workshop. You got to go watch the workshop for yourself. And my talk from the recent CPI event is also going to be posted pretty soon. I'll probably premiere it tomorrow morning. It's almost done. I'm editing. I'm putting video clips in to make the points and stuff. But that talk will air pretty soon. But and we're doing these morning messages for CPI. Killian did a great job with his. There's another one. Surprise, not going to give away who it's from. But there's one airing tomorrow morning. Beautiful. That'll be great. And, we're doing great stuff. But I guess I just wanted to end on a positive note here because we just relived a lot of bullshit that's happened over the last year. And I want to end on a positive note, right? Because, we made a banner. I don't know if you saw this. We made a banner here. I think I can pull up an image of it. We made a banner when we had our CPI rally in New York City. We had a rally where we went and joined the religious gathering outside the UN, where they had a Russian Orthodox priest and they had a Jewish leader and others. There was a rally at the UN, and we marched to it. And we brought our banner about North Korea, our banner for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, but we made another banner. And so I want to pull up an image of that banner. I have to find it here. I want to leave on a positive note, right? My job is to spread positivity in this world. And I remind myself often, I get angry sometimes, I get fired up on these streams, but that is not my job, right? I mean, as much as you all love to hear me rant against the decaying liberal order and all of that, my job is to spread hope and truth and peace in the world. That is my job, right? And if I'm not doing that, if I'm making you feel negative, if I'm putting negativity, if I'm making you angry or something like that, I am not doing my job. My job is to bring optimism and hope, right? That is what I am here to do. So I want to show you. Here we go. So I'm going to put this. This is the banner that we made since we were going to a religious rally, right? The Center for Political Innovation. We were going to join a religious rally at the UN. It was organized by Pastor Milhan and some of my friends. They had a peace rally at the UN. We made a banner for our rally that we had, our rally in Union Square that we did. We made a banner for it that would be something that we thought a more religious crowd might be sympathetic to, right? And so I am going to put that banner on the screen right now because we picked out a particularly meaningful Bible verse for the banner. And this is the banner that we made. We thought this would be a banner that would present CPI to a religious rally, a religious protest, a religious demonstration, a crowd of religious folks who gathered at the United Nations. We wanted to present ourselves in a way that they could relate to. This is the banner that we made. So take a look. This is what our banner said, right? And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. Revelations 22:2-3. That's describing Eden restored. That's in the book of Revelations. After all the blood and death and killing and the great beast and the thing high up on the thing and the poor horsemen and all of that. Final section of Revelations. Says, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And no longer will there be any curse. That's what we're striving for. We're striving for a world without poverty, a world without oppression, a world without war, a world where everyone has enough, so inequality is just not a thing. A world where people can relate to their fellow human beings in an atmosphere of love and kindness. We are striving for that ultimate goal of Eden restored, of the higher stage of communism, whatever you want to call it. Right? Those are 3 CPI members. Actually, one's a People's Party member. The other 2 are CPI members. That's the banner. And we thought that the religious crowd would appreciate that banner. And they apparently did because they tweeted out an image of it on their account. So it seems to have hit home with them. But, we are trying to build something very, very special with CPI. Right? So I guess I just wanted to end on that note. So I guess I will end the stream here. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody. Talk to you soon.